Hey everybody, this is Colin. How is my audio? Can you hear me all right? This is our first time ever doing a live stream. Let me know. Do I got any thumbs up in chat? Microphone check, 1 2 1 2. I bomb atomically. Socrates' philosophies and hypotheses can't define how I be dropping these mockeries. Okay, right on. We're good. Hey, yeah, thank you, Amrit, thank you, Jay. Glad to see everyone in there. I'm seeing a couple of hands. Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about the Copaganda that's been put out by the CBC there. Oh, audio is doubled, like a quick echo. Let's see. Yeah, no, I was having that issue before, so maybe I'll tone it down a bit. I'll actually pull it up here. Oh yeah, we got echo chamber effect in here. Maybe, Jackson, can you make like a quick constant noise? Okay. Microphone check. So I got video capture device, I got audio input capture. It's my first time actually using OBS. We might have to deal with the echo chamber effect, and you'll probably have to listen to my wonderful daughter Hanini. Do you want to come over and say hello? Hello. That's our live studio audience.
Hi.
Yeah, little cutie. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna get to business real quick here.
Is it picking up multiple audio inputs?
Let's see.
Like off the camera or the laptop?
I wonder, actually, video capture device. Oh, okay. I think I was turning on the little mic on the camera. Okay, how does that sound now? I'm pretty sure I got it. You're watching yourself on the live stream. Okay.
Shadow.
Yeah, I think we're golden. Yeah, that's crisp. All right, thank you. We're good to go. Thank you for your patience. So once again, the title of this stream is on the topic of CBC's Copaganda, Coastal GasLink, and the Royal Bank of Canada's fossil fuel fixation. So we're still waiting on one uncle. Supposed to be here, special surprise guest, good friend of ours. In the meantime, I think we could just do a quick introduction. My name is Colin Sutherland Wilson. I am from the Fireweed clan of the Gitxsan Nation, and we're filming live in Kispiox. And you may have seen my mug around. I've done a lot of work in a lot of different places. My goal in life and my work all revolves around the rights of my people, the basic human rights of the Gitxsan, and as well as our neighboring indigenous peoples and indigenous peoples worldwide. And so, a bit of my background, I studied climate studies, environmental studies, hydrology, and geography, political science, kind of everything along those lines. And so we're going to get into that a bit today. And yeah, right now I'll pass it over to my good friend Chris for a quick introduction.
Well, see, Colin, my name's Chris.
You swing the mic around?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, how's that for 360?
Yeah, I'm just a regular uncle. I'm a Bontagwitchin citizen. Our territory is in North Yukon, or what is now North Yukon. But I live with my family neighboring New Hazelton. My son and wife are both Gitxsan, Laxgeek, and so yeah, just here to sit on the couch and talk about cops and pipelines and banks and our future.
Right on. Yeah, and since everyone saw our microphone action, I'm wondering if our cameraman can show our nice janky little setup down there. That's that's some thread still attached to the spindle, and that'll be holding our microphone in place today. So hopefully that sounds all right for you all. And yeah, I think, we're still waiting on Vanya, but we could probably get started on gosh, what do you think? Because I do want Vanya here, and that's the surprise guest. I just kind of dropped the ball right there, but he can introduce himself when he gets here. But yeah, in the meantime, just how have you been, Chris?
Oh, it's been busy times. I think there's just a lot going on in everyone's nations, everyone's communities. And the same time the outside world just doesn't stop spinning, so just obviously lots of things that I think are threatening to our communities that we still have to be able to talk about and organize around. So just learning more about like the Enbridge application with the EA office here, and just staying informed of what's going on. Seems like every day there's something new in the news, like the spill in the Woods Inqua from the tunneling that they've done there, and the deposits they found in the waterways. So every day it just seems like there's just like some new disclosure that just makes you wonder, like, when is this gonna end?
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think that's something we can actually just talk about briefly before we get into the other topics. It's all connected, but this Enbridge proposal that's happening on Gitxsan territory, that's right in our backyard. And Enbridge, I guess just the context for folks who don't know, Enbridge is another proposed pipeline that would connect to the exact same Montney gas formation that will supply Coastal GasLink. And it's, all a part of this kind of wider project of taking gas from these Montney gas fields and exporting them through BC and then overseas. And so Enbridge is another one that's on the list. It's the West Coast Connector pipeline, and the same company as well as Coastal GasLink, TC Energy. They also have another pipeline on the books for northern BC, which is the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission. But Enbridge was largely dormant. They had received an extension on their permit because they hadn't really started work up here for a while. They originally got their permit the exact same year as Coastal GasLink, so 2014. And there's a lot of issues with those Christy Clark era permits, and I think we'll really get into that. But so they got their permit 2014. They got one extension, which is the maximum allowable limit according to the Environmental Assessment Act, but only recently they've been pushing to get another extension. And so they're really fighting hard to not be accountable to the new Environmental Assessment Act that was adopted since then. which does include the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or certain aspects of that, which were introduced to Canadian law also since that initial certificate was issued. And we'll get into it more further on, but the whole notion of consent is completely non-existent in that era of certification, which has led to many of the issues we've seen with Coastal GasLink. And so that's something that we're trying to be proactive here in Gixsan territory, to kind of raise awareness about this process, where basically Enbridge is trying to take a back door in order to facilitate the construction of a pipeline, which I think not only rivals the size of Coastal GasLink, but I'm pretty sure is even expected to be a larger diameter pipe. So that's something that I've been working on as a part of my WILP, which is a Gixsan governance. I guess we can even explain some of this. Hey, I'm sure most of the folks who are watching are somewhat familiar with the clan system that we have, that's kind of mutually shared between the Gixsan and the Wet'suwet'en and the house system. But so when I said before that I'm a part of the Fireweed clan from Kispiox, that is the government I subscribe to. That is the citizenship that I identify by. So in my work for my WILP, which is the core unit of our governance on Gixsan territory, and it's the same as the houses on Wet'suwet'en territory, we've been proactively trying to dissuade the Minister of Environment, right? I think George Heyman, and we've been trying to dissuade him from granting the extension to this permit. And we figure, if they want to try to build a pipeline up here anyway, they might as well do it at least by the absolute minimum standards that are set within BC's own current laws, rather than get away with the faulty process that has been criticized time and time again, that led up to the whole Coastal GasLink conflict. So what do you think on that?
I think Enbridge probably wishes they hired John Horgan before Tech Coal did.
Oh yeah.
Try and grease the wheels on that decision. I think it's quite a astonishing sort of argument that they've made, for the extension of their certificate, to basically declare an emergency because of in part decades of infringing Treaty 8 rights resulted in a court order for the provincial government to stop doing that. That they're saying that in part constituted an emergency, that is enough of a reason they need a longer time to develop their pipeline proposal. I think I think it just kind of goes to show as well, sort of still viewing indigenous rights, whether they're treaty rights or title, as still more or less something that's an impediment. Respecting rights is an emergency that our normal operations just can't handle. I think it's great that you've been sharing information about that. I really didn't know anything sort of about it, just knowing that's one of several pipeline proposals that have been sort of hanging around this neck of the woods for a while. And you kind of get these zombie mega project proposals that you can just visualize if they actually did go ahead, given what's already going on in the Lakiup and the Yinta, it's just hard to imagine. I come from North Yukon, and in our territory, we don't have roads or railway or linear infrastructure disturbances. So even now, it's hard for me to picture what I see here in my territory, in terms of like the scale of development, and then to think of like, you know, major project corridors and that, you know, it's really hard to imagine, you know, especially when you see what comes with it. Like, you know, any of us who have been over, you know, in the Yinta and seen, you know, like the private security and the gated off roads, and, you know, like telling chiefs and elders, you know, where they can and cannot go, or maybe you'll be arrested. Like, I can't imagine my own, you know, chiefs and elders being treated that way, like in our territory. So, you know, it just, brings up a lot.
Oh, it's unreal. It's unreal. And, you know, your point where, you know, Enbridge is saying, okay, you know, industries, including our own, have completely trashed these people's homeland up in the Blueberry area. And the highest courts recognize that, you know, the accumulated damages have severely impacted their ability to sustain a livelihood on that land. And so then, you know, that becomes an emergency for the pipeline company, while saying, oh, well, actually, we're the ones inconvenienced now because we want to build this project to keep doing the exact same industry that, you know, led to this entire court case.
Mm-hmm. I know, I think it's actually kind of like, you know, dangerous. And like, I'm very happy for, you know, Blueberry River, and like at least getting a semblance of, like, I don't know if you'd call it redress, or for, you know, just like devastating impacts. But at the same time, you know, it's, you know, that they've compensated them and like given them a greater measure of control is like championed as almost like like a model, like, you know, I think that can be dangerous because, you know, it's like, okay, well, we can just, you know, basically leave everything but the bones and the feathers of your territory, and, you know, there'll be a big bill, you know, if you sue us one day, but, you know, we'll continue on kind of mentality. You know, it's kind of sad.
Yeah, that is. It doesn't really seem like there's much consequences if anyone here decides to go and trash someone's entire homeland. And, you know, like if if you got enough money, if you got enough political sway, you can just kind of brush it under the rug and keep on going. And it's, you know, it's quite frankly unreal. And you know, I'd be interested too to look more into that case, just to see some of the arguments that the province or, you know, the industry proponents are putting forward, because I have a feeling it's kind of the same old story of, you know, just vehemently denying like the people's occupation on the land, denying the, you know, how much they've been affected by the industry, denying the you know, their rights and title in any sense. And you know, that's going to get kind of back into the big picture topics that we're going to be talking about, especially with Coastal GasLink. And, you know, once again, you know, our Wet'suwet'en friend should be here. But he'll be here soon enough. Maybe let's just talk a bit more too about, you know, the implications of these projects for British Columbians, for people in this province. You know, recent studies have shown that Montney gas field, which they're planning to exploit to its fullest, despite having goals within this province, set goals of reducing our emissions by, I'm pretty sure it's 30, is it 30 or 40% by 2030? I guess I don't really have.
To be honest, the numbers just stop.
Yeah,
it's like, it's, you know, whatever number the government like has no plan to actually achieve.
Well, I guess
save us from burning alive, you know.
I guess the wild part is there's supposedly a plan to reduce our emissions, But meanwhile, we're ramping up the development to levels never before seen in this province. And while the fossil fuel companies globally are making the most money they've ever made, and we're going to be going from 0 pipelines in the north, like crossing through these territories here, to multiple. Like I'm pretty sure we're talking about the 3, and there's the one almost completed just south of us, Coastal GasLink. And so this Montney, the studies have shown, there was a study that looked at the gas formations, but point source projects that had the most potential to be the greatest emitters of greenhouse gases globally. And the Montney, I'm pretty sure it ranked within the top 5. Like it was right up there. Like this is a project that exceeded, I guess what, many Canadians would be going off and criticizing, like, other nations for being like, wanton polluters and, pollution criminals. And, some countries are totally deregulated and do all this awful stuff. So we got to offset them with, our lower carbon emitting, better, greener source stuff. But no, like we're going to be the top 5 if these projects go through, if this place is fully exploited, because the methane, which is 86, over 80 times more potent than CO2, like that's going to be pouring out of there from the fracking, from the transport, from the terminals that carry it overseas. And yeah, no, I think it will kind of go down in history, at least in my opinion, if we're complicit in this as, climate criminals, because like, when we look at the overall climate picture, we're not going to feel it up here. I mean, we're going to feel it to a certain extent. Like we already see it. We've seen the changing weather patterns. We've seen the irregular winters, like especially in our neck of the woods, and that really dramatically affects the water levels of the rivers and the salmon. And there's a whole bunch of metrics we can use to look at it. But, we're not going to be the ones who are in the places where temperatures are now rising to the point where it can kill a human being. Like, we're not going to be the people in the global south who are going to be suffering disproportionately from, the misdeeds of what would basically, be the people who use the most and produce the most carbon emissions per capita, which is the people in the global north. And so I think it's a pretty serious one, and British Columbia is just going full bore on this LNG. There's all this ridiculous, I'd call it like greenwashing propaganda that's going out there around the industry, where they're saying stuff like, oh, we got to help developing countries. LNG is a greener source of electricity, so we can replace their coal-firing plants. But when you look into it, there's not a single agreement that exists between Canada and anybody that says, okay, we sell you our LNG and you're going to tone down your coal burning. And, so then I remember hearing China referenced specifically in this example of this wonderful plan to save the earth by sending out Canada's methane gas. And when you look at China, like I did a little bit of research. Basically, Google has China committed to, tone down its coal burning. The answer is a resolute no. They're going to increase the coal burning. They're going to increase the LNG. And so then at the end of the day, like our LNG here in Canada is just going to be contributing to the global fossil fuel matrix. And, in all odds, it's just going to be offsetting the need for transitioning to any type of renewable sources of energy. And I'm pretty sure, like the way it seems to me, is that BC, Canada, like these northern.
Not to mention like just I think about this because in my territory in the north, like where part of our territory is north of the Arctic Circle, and like melting permafrost is like something that we're experiencing, and it's gonna, you know, become more intensified. So I think about just like the future life of infrastructure, just like the actual wells, the actual pipeline, like these things that are actually taking up the land, you know, the liquefaction and sort of shipment facilities, you know, these giant billion-dollar projects for like a fossil fuel industry that like has like an inherent, like, no matter what your viewpoint is, like those assets will not be transporting or liquefying fossil fuels for really like what we can maybe say like 30 to 40 years, you know, like being super generous. Like if we're to survive you know, the warming that we're experiencing, you know, it's like it's just gotta stop. So like I just picture like these like empty pipelines or just like these giant facilities that no longer serve any purpose, just being, you know, like liabilities all over, and you know, indigenous communities increasingly being on the hook for those if they've purchased into these projects as sort of a, you know, part of this narrative of like economic reconciliation, but then being, you know, left with, you know, an asset that's essentially worthless and a liability within like a generation. Like that's just, you know,
that's a steep price to pay, like especially when you consider these projects result in, you know, massive losses of your territory base. You have these huge right-of-ways that just completely bisect your land. You know, quite often that results in limited mobility,
injunctions, exclusion zones,
cops,
private security patrolling them.
See, I can't even imagine that. Like as a Gixan here, like, you know, I can go anytime out onto my lachip, out onto my territory, you know. And a big part of that too is like because we did shut it down to BC a couple of years ago. But, you know, like I can't even imagine though having the same degree of industry, like even what I've just seen down in coastal GasLink, you know, happen up here. Because I'm used to walking, you know, on the roads. I'm used to going around the bush. I'm used to going out and checking out the waterfalls or the fishing holes, and you know, it's just a big part of the livelihood. And even thinking about just thousands of vehicles, heavy machinery, constant traffic, you know, the amount of pollutants that would just come from the vehicles alone is outstanding.
That's
because
like one thing I pay attention to every time I've gone out there is like I've just noticed like dead animals on the side of the, you know, like porcupine. You know, it's something that you don't see as often as you do. I know certainly back home, you know. So you always pay attention to, you know, just impacts like that, you know, just to what's around there, right, in the environment.
Oh, it's unreal. Like it's, you know, it's stressful for so many reasons, and I think something I do want to get into once Vanya arrives. And I swear we're not just trying to delay the start of the stream here. Something I do want to get into is just the culture, like the ethics. Like there's a reason why so many people have such a strong feeling against these projects too, and it's, you know, it's not because, you know, like myself or others are just against progress. No, like I think, you know, sustaining our livelihoods is crazy important. But you know, there's certain cultural values that we grow up with in how we treat the land, how we treat each other, how we treat life. Like life is sacred in itself. And so like those instances of, you know, seeing animals just killed by the road unnecessarily, like the heightened risk to all life that comes onto those territories. Like each one of those things, it just hits you right in the gut. And it's a hard pill to swallow to see that. And I think, our surprise guest, who I already revealed who they are, will be here. And we'll come on in. Gala tinin. So, hey, come on in. I'll move my cat over so you can take the spot there. Right on.
How you doing?
Good.
Good to see
You, man.
you. Where do I fit in, right?
Yeah, right in the center.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, little dude.
So our buddy here traveled quite a ways to be here with us today, and we're really happy that he's here.
How's it going?
You want to do a quick intro?
Sure. Sai Satni Vanya Gilsehudista. My name is Vanya Cutler. I'm from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, from the Dark House, and we're also known as Unistoten, which is people of the headwaters. And thank you for having me here today.
Anytime.
You're outnumbered.
Yeah, it's true.
Hey?
Yeah.
Dene brother right
My
here.
Dene
Oh
brother.
my goodness. Where's my daughter? I got one gig stand right here. Hey, we could take him. I've got a war club hidden right in the crack of the couch, so
What's up, Kai?
if they start acting up. Oh yeah, we should do a shout out too to Kai. If you just want to.
The man behind the cameras
the man
there.
behind the camera.
Come on in the front. Come on, man. Expose yourself.
Hey.
I'm really sorry about the audio and the light crapping out, and I just beg your forgiveness. I'll do my best. I'll do better next time.
If there's anyone to blame me.
You know what? There's no bad angles today.
Yeah, true.
That mic picks up only from the front, so when Chris is talking, you gotta rotate it over towards him.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that you can hear it. I was trying to put it on a different tripod, but
Okay. So I think we've got our mic sorted out, and I'm loving the feedback from chat here. Hey, Nemox is in chat. Look at that. Hey, Hadi.
Going off. What are we on here? We're on
YouTube. Okay.
My son said you should get on Twitch.
Twitch. I know.
I told him
looking
YouTube.
at
He's like,
them.
you need to get on Twitch. I'm like,
You
oh,
got Twitch.
I'll recommend that. I don't know if I have
yeah.
any strings to pull here, but
Okay. Next time we'll be live on Twitch in accordance with the wishes of the younger generations. So we
with that other audience.
I wonder, maybe okay, we'll just keep rotating this mic around so we can pick up everyone. We got a comment in there that my left ear loves you guys, so we got some directional audio stuff going on. Shout out to your left ear there, Conlon. Okay.
coming to you in mono today. It's all good.
Yeah, mono. This is Okay, so I think we can get started. So like the first topic is Copaganda. And so I've got CBC's report lined up. And so I'm thinking we can watch it. We can give our hot takes. Like maybe your son's familiar with this kind of content, like React.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
watch it for sure. Because
Let's
I
react.
read that article you shared with me a few days ago, but let's refresh our memories.
All right. So Uncle's React to CBC Copaganda. Let's get ready. So now I'm going to go in my OBS software, flip it over. Now I'm going to pull up my handy dandy folder.
Between the North Coast Mountains and the Bulkley Valley lies a glacier-fed river that is breathtaking in its beauty. But in recent years, it's also been the scene of ugly confrontation. Don't point your gun at me!
It's a summer with gun.
A series of RCMP raids on protesters defying a court order. And with every raid, the temperature rose until things boiled over and led to this. But who would go so far and why?
I know we would never ever tell anybody or support anybody to do any kind of damage.
Hereditary Chief John Risdale wants to show us what the battle here is all about. The Wet'suwet'en call it Wet'suwet'en.
Wet'suwet'en means blue, green, pure river.
Couldn't be more clear from here.
It's beautiful.
But when he reaches the river's edge, he finds the water is far from clear.
That seems awful dirty for this time of year.
Just upstream, crews are tunneling under the riverbed to make way for a section of the coastal GasLink pipeline. He's been trying to get up close. Security won't let him.
I don't need to make arrangements with anybody. I'm Chief Namox, and this is Wet'suwet'en territory.
But Chief Namox is turned away because the worksite is also a crime scene. They emerged from the forest around midnight in February of last year, firing flare guns and swinging axes into the side of security trucks. An excavator on site was used to destroy other heavy machinery and mobile trailers. The estimated damage as high as $20 million.
It was planned, it was practiced, and carried out in a very methodical manner.
Chief Superintendent John Brewer is in charge of the community industry.
And that's Gold Commander?
Hey, that's the real Gold Commander. No, actually, I'm the real Gold Commander.
Yeah. Is this the same guy that Angela Starrett was interviewing?
Yeah.
He was getting all like hostile in the interview?
Yeah, that's him.
As we're paused right now, just like, look how he's acting in front of the camera. Just imagine how he's acting when there's no cameras around, right? Like, he was like getting short with all the questions, and like, he couldn't even contain himself, right? Like, it was just...
Well, and I think of reporting on this issue from CBC, like, you have had, like, Angela Starrett, I think of Brett Forrester, you know, two CBC journalists who, like, have actually spent a little time, like, trying to, like, tell the story about issues on the ground.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they feed it to this, like, reporter from Calgary who's, like, never covered the story, like...
Just a total transition of someone that, yeah.
Yeah, like, just that in itself, like, that they were selective of who they gave this sort of exclusive interview to. It's like, yeah, someone who's not going to, like, ask him essentially any questions.
Yeah, because it's two different, totally perspectives, because she has the Land Back podcast, right? And here you've got an episode, there's an episode with my Unistotan family, and yeah, it's like she's on the ground, like you said, trying to figure out what it is, Land Back and everything, right? And you get a lovely interview with this guy who's like very short in the interview. I can't remember what episode it is, but it's on Spotify. It's on all the streaming platforms, I think. So.
Yeah, and we'll see. Like, you know, when this guy's doing his interview with John Brewer, he's basically in his questions just laying out half of the RCMP press release. Like it's not critical. I think it's something important to pay attention to. When we kind of go forward, just listen to how he talks to Gold Commander, and then listen how he talks to Molly. It's a whole different ballgame. You know, I'd almost like give him what's the like an Academy Award for this performance when he's talking with
this is the guy right here.
Gold Commander. Yes, I think Rob Brown.
Okay.
Shout out to Rob Brown.
He looks pretty white. He looks pretty white for being brown, but.
Okay. Yeah. So
and from Alberta too, right? Yeah. So there you go. 2 strikes. Let's find the third one.
Okay, let's listen. Let's listen in.
Response Group, or CURG, an RCMP unit formed to police resistance to the pipeline and other projects like it. 8 months after the worksite attack, the CURG was also targeted in a late-night arson attack. 4 RCMP vehicles and some others nearby destroyed. It wasn't always like this. For more than a decade, protest against the pipeline had been peaceful. But the last RCMP raid in the fall of 2021 marked a major turning point. For the first time in the conflict, the protesters were charged with criminal contempt of court. And at the same time, Coastal GasLink was finally able to ramp up operations here. That's when things turned violent down at the worksite. That was more than a year ago. RCMP had 40 investigators on the case, a $100,000 reward had been posted, and the attackers are still out there.
So I just want to say something too. Like when they're talking about, oh, it used to be peaceful and then all this violence started. Like all this violent footage is the cops. Like it's the cops smashing people's windows. It's the cops dragging people away with machine guns on their hips. Like it's, I don't know. Like I just personally, you know, there's a big distinction between, you know, seeing some inanimate property harmed and then seeing basically an occupying force go onto the unceded land of indigenous peoples and threaten them with force to the point to, you know, in order to facilitate the resource extraction from their territory. Like it's, I don't know, like I just right off the bat, that jumps out at me. Like there's a very different definition of violence. That's the undertone of this video.
Yeah, I mean, like, whatever anyone's personal views are about, like, property damage, like, the story and the use of violence to describe, like, what is essentially property damage to, like, you say, inanimate, like, insured objects that, you know, by their definition can be easily sort of, like, replaced, you know, like contrasted with like actual damage to land that is ongoing. But the way it's described, like, you know, how he shows like the river at the beginning, like, oh, look at the beautiful pristine Wodzinqua, you know, the opening scene, and it's like, do you see the destruction all along that road and that work site, and yet like some damage to like a trailer and a pipeline is like, they make it sound like, you know, like a triple homicide was like committed. Like, this is so violent.
Totally, and this is like all a part of the brainwashing, because I remember when the vehicles burnt up in Smithers and white people were just really upset about these vehicles that burnt up, and I can say white people, my dad's white, so there we go, before everybody gets upset. Like, yeah, why aren't people reacting with this much anger when the police kill an indigenous person, or, you know, we've been mistreated for so long that the brainwashing is just like, it's hard not to feel like a second-rate citizen when you see people just overly react to property damage. But then when something happens to, say, someone from our community, that it's like there's no reaction. So this is just part of all of the brainwashing that Canada wants to do, right? Like, just to make everything okay, like the mistreatment of Indigenous people, the mistreatment of unceded territory that we never gave up. And it's just kind of put out there, and that's just like, this is probably like some of the only information that some of these people will see, and the continuation of this brainwashing will go on, right? So
yeah, and you know, when we get further into this video too, well, you know, it's really interesting to me, like the narratives behind this property destruction. That's something we got to really pick into, because the whole point of this video, you'll see it, it's to craft a real boogeyman out there, you know, that on one hand totally delegitimizes, you know, the indigenous peoples through their narrative, as well as, you know, presents like a threat to Canadians. So we'll, you know, we'll jump back in and we'll see what Mr. Brown has to say next.
Mr. Brown.
How close are you to making an arrest,
So,
timeline-wise?
I have been saying to my team, we are weeks away for the last few months. Certainly before the new year. I believe we are that close.
This is the first time he's revealing key details of the investigation into the worksite attack, saying police have identified more than half a dozen suspects and have been tracking their movements, examining videos like this one the protesters posted just weeks before the attack. A masked and camo-wearing group pulling trees and tires across the road. Was it a rehearsal? They're the same impediments officers encountered trying to get up the only road to the worksite that night. So how did the attackers escape, if not down that road? Police say the group fled the worksite on snowmobiles, using the pipeline right-of-way, which runs parallel to the road. When they reached a protest camp, the attackers made their getaway in waiting trucks, while police were still busy assessing the threat at the worksite and securing the crime scene.
So that's just wild to me.
Yeah, I know. I thought, you know, like, if there was one of the local journalists, you know, who's been covering this and has actually been down that road, this, like, how the hell do they get from 44 to the highway in a vehicle? Like, without any, like, what were the RCMP doing?
Yeah, no.
Were they just, like, standing around that fire? Like,
Okay, so
What were they doing? We could, you know, Tim Hortons just opened up in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, speculation, right?
Yeah.
That's true. They could have been at the
That's
grand
just one
opening.
theory. That's my theory. I don't know.
Maybe those special, was it like the Justin Bieber donuts were out at that time?
Those Tukes were going for a pretty penny on eBay, so yeah.
But just look at this map. Okay. So they're saying that they drove the skidoos all the way down to 44. So, you know, like, why would, you know, it's almost too convenient. Who just goes and parks all their vehicles in a place that directly implicates, you know, like the local indigenous resistance? It's like, okay, we're just going to go park in like the most obvious way to try to set up people to look really bad here. And then we're going to go on the road. And like Chris was saying, like that's a single road. Like there's only one way to access Houston. And that's 44 whole kilometers up the road. And even when there's not an active crime scene, if I'm driving up that road, there'll be dozens of industry trucks, private security, police, constantly, 24/7, all times of day and night. And yeah, they're telling us that they just drove down the road after that, scot-free, no issues. Like
I mean, like, someone could convince me that the RCMP is just that incompetent. Like, that's also a plausible theory. But
Are we connecting this to the Tim Hortons theory, or what, where are we going with this?
you know, it's just wild to me too. Like, okay, so they had 40 investigators. Like, it's been how long since this happened? And like, you know, now they're just saying out of the blue that okay, like they just drove right to this one spot, and we knew this all along.
Just
and
like
we
one main road,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's just bush after that, right? Like,
yeah.
so like they had one job to do. So yeah, I don't know.
No, it's.
I don't know the level of competence of the police officers they're sending in the middle of nowhere too, right? Like, are they sending? Are people volunteering? Like who's coming out? You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of folks from the south, it seems like, you know, especially from kind of the lower mainland area, like people with experience and what's the name of that squad where they're like dealing with drug dealers and busting down doors and, you know, used to packing around the big guns. And so those guys, they send them up here and they get a pretty bonus on their paycheck, and it's voluntary. So they're not conscripting cops. They're, you know, pretty much letting like these guys come up that, you know, in my mind, they fit a certain profile.
Yeah.
Like you see them, we saw them in Newtown at the All Clans or Blockade. Like they all have the thin blue line patches. They all are, you know, extremely, it's like fraternalistic. Like you know, they got each other's backs like nobody's business. And you know, to them, they're in enemy country surrounded by hostiles.
yeah, totally. I mean, that's the, like, one thing that I, you know, like, this story doesn't tell the context of, like, and I think is an example of, like, military type thinking and tactics being used against indigenous people. Like, this is like, you know, basically counterinsurgency, like low intensity warfare in terms of how they, you know, police indigenous peoples who are like out on the land, including like, you know,
know, folks are remember like Gustafson Lake in the 90s, right, where they did send in military to, attack essentially Schwetmik land defenders, where there was like landmines and, like hundreds of rounds, actually shot at indigenous people. And there's actually a footage that came out, it's actually on YouTube, you can just Google it, that when some of those land defenders were on trial, there was video of the RCMP sitting around a meeting room while Gustafson Lake was going on, where the RCMP is saying, like, talking about smear campaigns in the media, like that's their specialty, and they were doing it throughout that conflict in terms of like feeding certain narratives to media, in that case portraying land defenders as terrorists, and so you see essentially the same thing happening with poor Rob Brown being the police scribe here,
It's unreal, and this video will speak for itself, but I think what's even more damning is the article, and I'll pull that up afterwards. That is some sensational stuff. So, we'll jump into this, because we've yet to get to the actual boogeyman
But
portion.
also going back to, the police restricting indigenous people is nothing new, especially in Alberta and BC here, because if you can look at, there's the passsystem.com, I think. It's like a 40-minute documentary explaining, that we were restricted to the reserve if we didn't have a pass. So like if you're out on your territory, right, then they deemed you had no business, you had to go to the reserve. If you had nothing going on, you still had to go back to the reserve. Or, hello.
Hi.
How's it going? But yeah, like back to like the pass system was like, it was just a way of restricting, the country could take over for resource extraction and the theft of our land, right? So it's this policing indigenous people out west is nothing new, right? This is the same tactic they've been using since colonization. So yeah, it's definitely a good short documentary to see, because I think John A. Macdonald wanted to, it wouldn't pass through legislation, but the RCMP or whatever they're called back in the day were still enforcing it. So it's pretty fucked up.
Yeah. No, that's all part of that bigger picture, and I think we're gonna really hash into that, because just like all the premises of this reporting of violent actions by protesters, like that just completely diminishes the actual story. And that's the story of colonization. That's the story of very well documented systematic genocide and land theft. And that's the root of the actual conflict that's happening here. This isn't about a pipeline. Like, the pipeline's the latest thing in a series of, hundreds of imposed colonial projects and hundreds of, very well documented violations of our human rights. Like, it just totally diminishes everything that we work towards, everything, our elders fought for in the Delgamuukw court case, everything that they did just to keep our cultures and our language alive. Like, when all that gets relegated down to, okay, you just got these difficult protesters who are here to, be agitators.
Hijacked by outsiders.
Hijacked, yeah. It quite frankly gets ridiculous. So I'm gonna... Okay, how's the audio for everyone, actually? Just 1 second before I fire this back up. Then... I think maybe I'll sort out after this video. Give me some notes, because if it's crazy loud when we're playing the videos, and then, then you gotta turn it down whenever we start talking. I can see that being a little inconvenient, but we'll finish off this video here.
Investigators later recovered DNA evidence there, the destruction also holding clues. Not everyone knows how to operate an excavator, and police know who among the protesters can. But after more than a year of investigating, the Mounties have concluded that it's not the local group that planned the attack. John Brewer believes it was orchestrated and largely executed by outside forces.
Are you suggesting that the people who are involved, the suspects that you have in the worksite attack, came and infiltrated the group, that's the word you just used, and had some sort of attachment to the anarchist movement, such as it is in Canada?
He just said his whole statement for him. Which, I guess, you know, even if he's like trying to build off this question they don't show in the interview, you know, that's just wild to me. Like that was a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how many takes he needed. John, did I say this right?
Okay. Well, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Brown. We'll continue on.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say whether they are directly part of the anarchist movement or believe in it or use their tactics, absolutely.
No one has claimed responsibility for the worksite attack, but an anonymous post on an anarchist website did take credit for the arson. The same website where credit was taken for damage to drilling equipment at a Calgary storage yard. The latest posting, a claim of sabotage, that before they were buried, some pipes had tiny holes drilled into them. Far from infiltrating the local protest group, anarchists were actually invited.
Hi, I'm Rob.
The chief took us to meet Molly Wickham.
Which do you prefer, Molly or Slato? Okay.
The local protest leader, who goes by Slato, has called for anarchists to join the cause.
We are calling on you, our allies, other indigenous nations, labor unions, anarchist groups.
You called for people from that movement to be a part of this movement.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of people that we've worked with in the past that are amazing, great human beings.
But may have participated in that. So do you feel some responsibility for that then, if you called for them to come here?
Absolutely not.
Who do you think is responsible for that attack?
I don't have an idea.
Do you understand why I might find that hard to believe?
Yes,
Okay.
I do.
Were you a
Because
part
we've
of it?
been here. Absolutely not.
And why wouldn't you have a sense of who would be behind that? They were clearly doing it in solidarity with...
Yeah,
your
I think that there's a lot of resistance to this project that is outside of ourselves.
You know, I don't.
So who are the...
So isn't that interview wild?
It's like he's talking to a kid that wants to confess
Yeah.
that they did something. You know what I mean? Like it's the energy is kind of weird for sure.
You know, it sounds like he went in there like, I'm going to crack this case for my RCMP buddies, and I'm going to get the confession right here on the spot.
I'm gonna win an award.
Yeah, I'm going to win an award. Prize for investigation.
Best cop reporter.
Yeah.
Best cop beat piece of the year, Rob Brown.
Yeah, because, you know, the wild part is, too, like, you know, like, even with these cops, like, they haven't presented any evidence, like, around anarchists being actually responsible for this attack they keep talking about. Like, you know, it's not like they captured an anarchist and tortured a confession out of them.
It's all speculation.
It's all speculation.
And the funniest thing I found about this aspect of it is where he both in the written story and this one, like, they make out like anarchism as like the boogeyman, but they never actually talk about what it means or like where they do describe it. Like I think Brewer's like, anarchists target government infrastructure and facilities, but it's like this isn't a government pipeline. Like this is a private company's pipelines. Like it just like even their own machinations of like what anarchism is or means just like doesn't even like seem to make sense. But you know, that's like, you know, they just know that, you know, anarchy is like such a dog whistle, you know, like, and if they're the boogeyman, then like we can win over the, you know, it can justify us having you know, basically these shock troopers out on the Yenta 24/7 with the UN condemning us,
Yeah.
you know, continuously about, you know, alleged human rights violations happening, and just we can just, you know, say, oh no, there's this anarchist movement, and this is all necessary. Just you know, let us do our routine police enforcement. You know.
Yeah, I kind of have a feeling that that's the case. Like, this is their new spin to justify the enforcement, because, you know, how many times now has, like, different international bodies, including, like, committees in the United Nations, said, like, this is a clear violation of indigenous and human rights. Like, this project, the complete lack of consent, the destruction, the policing, like, it's all been named over and over, that this is... You know, this is not an okay thing. And I think it's getting harder and harder for them to justify, you know, enforcing this injunction and just raiding and...
The province giving them
Yeah.
whatever met $36 more million or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I think it's harder for them to say this when the goal is for us to just go and beat up indigenous people and put a project on their land. So now it's like, okay... And now, like, let's change the narrative, and it's anarchists who oppose Coastal GasLink. And like you're saying, they don't define anarchism. Like, and they don't go into the ideology or what it means.
and,
Like...
you know, and they're just like, you know, they describe Slato as just like the local protest leader.
Yeah.
You know, without, you know, like, describing what's in governance or, like, you know, like, what's at stake, really. You know, Delgamukia, stay away. Like, there's no mention of any of that.
Well, I think it's, you know, it seems to be beyond the grasp of CBC to understand that, you know, Wet'suwet'en people are a part of Wet'suwet'en houses. And it's the houses that are the authority.
Yeah, it's like many provinces.
Yeah.
Right? If that name isn't on the territory, then they don't have the authority to do anything on it, right? That's how our traditional system works. That's how we've held it down for thousands of years. If you read in any of our books, it's like we have some of the longest names, like longest connection to the land through the names, through our hereditary system. And it's all, that's in Spirit of the Land. Our box is full if you want to read more about Wet'suwet'en, Gigsan culture and alliance and our hereditary system. That's all in there. It's all information that's out there. You can find anything nowadays you can find a lot of the wrong information, but there's a lot of the right information if you sift through it, right?
Yeah.
And to go back to like the support from everybody, we got support from that really famous scientist. What's his name? Bruce Banner?
Oh yeah.
The Hulk?
Yeah.
The Avengers is saying don't fuck with them, and they're still not listening.
Exactly. He's going to be sending up his gamma radiation tokens. So I'm getting ready to get juiced. So you watch out, Canada.
Hulk smash.
The indigenous Hulks are on the way. Yeah, and that's the wild. I think I'm pretty sure it almost seems like they cut Molly off when she was requesting help. You know, like labor unions, anarchists. Like there's such a diverse group of people who pretty much are opposed to Coastal GasLink just on the merit of, you know, the human rights claims of the Wet'suwet'en, like the governance of Wet'suwet'en law. Like there's a lot of people. Just look at Shut Down Canada. In terms of like a indigenous solidarity movement, like for a people, that's probably one of the biggest we've ever seen in our history. You know, it's probably up there globally. Like there's a lot of people who've actually taken the time to look into the situation, to learn a bit more than what, you know, they'll see kind of at face value from, you know, the province or, you know, certain parts of the CBC. Because also, just shout out to Angela Sterrett. You know, I don't want to throw all the shade at CBC. Like, there's some people who do take the effort, and, you know, I would consider, like, very good human beings, but then you get stuff like this. And then, but yeah, like, there's a lot of people who, you know, have noticed that, like, as indigenous people on the ground, we've been putting out our own media for years. Like, we've been getting this story up for years. We've been talking about the nuances of rights and title for years. We've been talking about the Supreme Court of Canada case Delgamuch versus Gizdewe for not versus Delgamuch and Gizdewe versus the Queen for years, and it's, you know, it's not like there's a lack of information, but it really just comes down to, you know, you've got this whole spin machine of the cops, of the province, of certain parts of the media that are very closely connected to them, that just kind of bottleneck that feed of information to only give you this idea of, okay, you know, radical protesters. Yeah. And there's a few other parts of their narrative that we're going to dive into too, because I think further on in this video, you know, they're going to start perpetuating that old, you know, divided community narrative. They're going to really, you know, there's several parts of this news reporting that, you know, we can identify once we get to the end of, you know, just how they're trying to diminish that big picture movement of the Wet'suwet'en people fighting for their right to live on their land and under their own governance. So we'll just jump back in here.
The outsiders.
Learn more about the boogeyman.
Police aren't saying who their suspects are, and we don't know. We did pull the court documents on every arrest made in the conflict zone, and the details are revealing. About 70% of the people taken into custody were not from this area. Some were from other parts in BC, others other provinces, and even the US. And more than one of them had ties to the anarchist movement.
Our nation was hijacked.
More than one of them had ties.
So, you know, I'm probably counted in that demographic. You know, I'm from the neighboring Giksan Nation, and I was arrested down on it's IU territory. You know, the charges.
Invited.
Yeah.
Invited.
Oh, exactly. So that's the part that CBC will never understand.
The relationship.
So what you're saying is you infiltrated.
I do know an anarchist too, so shit, that's probably what he mentioned, ties to anarchist communities. Anarchists built our outhouse out on our Lachiv. Like, so, you know, it's getting pretty serious. Like, well, no, oh man, actually no, shut down the stream. They're gonna come after me.
This is the thing I find so hilarious, is because, like, I mean, if I took, like you, the few people I've ever met who, like, identify as anarchists and, like, you know, like, objectively, like, listed their qualities as, like, a human being, and I listed, like, the qualities of, like, most of the cops, like, you know, Jason Charney, Sergeant, and Serg, you know, just long history of, like, anti-indigenous abuse, racism, some of those private security out there, you know, have, like, served in, like, Northern Ireland, South Africa, who knows what they did there.
Internalized racism, doesn't Gold Commander claim some kind of nation?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know, like, if I was to make that list, you know, in terms of, like, human being and what's, like, redeemable about you, who should I be scared of? Like, who's the boogeyman? I'm pretty sure it's gonna be the people with guns who've been, like, oppressing us for thousands of, you know, hundreds of years. So,
you know, that's exactly it. So as a Giksan person, like, I'm not afraid of anarchists on my territory. In fact, like, you know, they've been very helpful and kind. You know, show up, like, whenever I need a hand. Like, if, you know, there's someone who's homeless in my family and I need help to fix them up a place, like, you know, I do a shout out, and half the time it's the anarchist friends that pop up. You know, they've got those values, mutual aid. You know, like, there's just a whole bunch to it. But
anti-racism, anti-fascism.
Anti-racism, anti-fascism. See, that's probably why the cops are so scared of it.
Yeah, they don't include that in their definition, right, of anarchism in any of the stories. Is like, oh yeah, they oppose, you know, police wearing thin blue line patches.
Yeah. And so what's wild to me is, you know, like, I've had people come after me in the past, like, oh, you know, you've got anarchist friends, so, like, you must be an anarchist and, like, a bad person. And, you know, I'll say to them, like, you know what, like, I don't identify as an anarchist. I'm Giksan. I go by Giksan law. but I'll trust an anarchist over a liberal, conservative, or New Democrat any day. Like, it's, you know, that's just from my life experience. Like, I know who's got my back. I know who's going to show up and help out. And that's, you know, just, it's just how it is. Like, you know, so I can't, it's just hard for me to support this, you know, this narrative of, you know, they're all terrible people who just wish destruction and to like usurp indigenous movements for their own goals. When, you know, like if I was, you know, like I'm half white, I guess I can say white too. But
Nito.
I'm Shua, yeah. So yeah, it's the Gibson word. I'm Shua. You know, if I was white and if I was living in Canadian society and I looked at the options for like political, ideological, you know, representation that I could, you know, follow along with, like those options are pretty weak. You know, like, yeah, I think honestly anarchism would just be something I'd probably gravitate to, just simply on the merits of, you know, wanting to be a responsible community member wherever I'm at. You know, wanting to show up for people, wanting to support, you know, kind of rejecting this whole crazy paternalizing world we live in where it's, you know, maybe that could be a topic for another time. I'll drag an anarchist onto our set if we do another live stream. I'll tie him up, bring him out from the valley.
Yeah, and I also think, like, you know, what's being alleged that, you know, the so-called anarchists have done, like sabotage to a pipeline, like, you know, I just, like, we were just talking about the other day, like, there's a Hollywood movie out now, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Like, there's, like, an action movie about, you know, just, like, regular people, like, you know, what was David Suzuki getting in shit for, like, you know, like, last year or whatever, like, suggesting that, oh, like, because the politicians aren't doing anything, like, you know, people are going to start doing this type of stuff. And, like, so, like, you know, just, like, I think there's, like, a conversation just that society, like, should be having about it. There's, like, people willing to, like, take quite risky action, you know, whoever they are, whether they're an anarchist or not, to, like, take this type of, like, radical action at risk, you know, of, like, who knows what. I think that says a lot, you know, and yeah, it's just something that I think, obviously, it's a symptom of, like, yeah, what is just being pushed on us.
No, I think you're right, because at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about anarchists here, but this isn't about anarchists. Like, and what you're saying is true. Like, when you have such a diverse, you know, population of people from all different backgrounds who, like, have expressed their support for the Wet'suwet'en and their struggle, like, and if industry just keeps pushing that, pushing it and pushing and pushing, and the human rights are, you know, violations are just getting more blatant, and like the propaganda, and like people see this, and like I honestly, you know, when David Suzuki said that, like it makes sense. Like you see that all around the world. Like if you push a people far enough, like, you know, things escalate. Yeah. Like when people feel like they have no recourse, if there's no democratic means of expressing their opinion or participating or even being able to get to the court cases that need to happen to sort these out within the British Columbia system, like if there's no avenue for dialogue, then, you know, people start to feel desperate, and there's just so many people that support the Wet'suwet'en. You know, it's so like who knows what could happen like going into the future, because like this is a hot topic issue, and like, you know, it's pretty clear they just want to explain this all away and dissolve all the momentum and, you know, de-escalate people all around the country, saying like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just protesters in a divided community, and all the band offices said okay, so everyone just go back to your normal business, no human rights violations happening here. Like people see through that, and, you know, and nobody wants it to get to this point.
Yeah.
Like,
well, one of the most famous examples of like sabotage becoming a tactic is like apartheid South Africa. like before they took the step of like armed resistance, because it was the same thing. Like every legitimate means of protesting, you know, or trying to change an unjust law, were just like, you know, they just were facing that repression, right? And it was like, okay, we got to start like, you know, hurting your economy, or, you know, where you're just left so desperate. And, you know, the fact that, yeah, we're seeing people in 2023 in Wet'suwet'en taking steps that people were taking in apartheid South Africa. Again, I think something that we should, like, as a society, at least recognize that, you know, we're continuing this sort of cycle.
It's, and I think just even in the bigger picture with climate, you know, this is going to be like, how would I put it? Like we're going to see all this at a bigger scale. You know, when people start to feel desperate about climate change, you know, when they have relatives around the world who are going to be suffering as a direct result of, you know, basically industry terraforming the planet, you know, escalating the climate change cycles, like, you know, thousands of times at the rate that they've ever been at. Like, there's been a pretty constant rate of change for 10,000 years. And now, all of a sudden, those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere just skyrocketed. And, you know, I probably don't even need to explain that. Just Google it. Like, you know, there's thousands of scientists talking about this. But, you know, people are gonna, you know, if they keep pushing the fossil fuel projects, if they keep pushing these things that are gonna have direct repercussions on people's lives.
Talking about you, RBC.
Yeah,
RBC, number one in the world. Fossil fuel financing. Go Canada, go.
Yeah. So, I mean, the more this gets pushed, like, we're gonna see this in so many different areas, so many different places, with so many different people.
So, back to this video though, did they do an introduction of who they're speaking to? And
they're just about to.
And then maybe we could also pull up the pipeline and look which territory it's going through, because I'm not 100% if it's even going through her territory. We'll listen to what she says, and maybe we can pull up the pipeline and see where it goes to.
Oh, sounds good.
Because she does, I don't know if she works for LNG, but she's definitely affiliated.
She does work for Coastal GasLink, and I think they do disclose it, but I'll play the interview.
Our nation's name was hijacked. They've taken our name and put it in a bad spotlight all across Canada.
Bonnie George works for Coastal GasLink. She's also Wet'suwet'en and believes the violence has done lasting damage to her people, saying many protesters feel the same and have left the movement.
The community members were just disgusted by what happened.
We've got so, you know, I also want to remember that's somebody's auntie. But
one of my cousins for sure.
Yeah. But that's, you know, it's always tough to see. Like, I did a Google search, Bonnie George, and I saw over the years, you know, almost every single CBC article speaking out against the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. Like, they're one of the sources for community, you know, being against it. Like, it's over and over and over and over. And, you know, just as someone from a house-based culture, that's kind of really hard to see. Because, you know, like you were saying, not everyone's territory has this pipeline crossing it. You know, even though the band councils are claiming everybody's territories as band council land. But, you know, like, fundamentally, let's get real for a second and just talk about our law and our territories. You know, it's, you know, we have crazy respect for the autonomy of other house groups, other territories, other families. And, you know, this all started with Vanya's house. You know, they said, like, we don't want all these pipelines coming through our land. Everyone else saw that, and according to our law, like, we got to respect that decision. Then you had all the other houses go in based on those house values to say, no, we oppose this project. Likewise on Giksan territory, you know, with all these proposed pipelines, like, if one single house who that pipeline's territory crosses says no, then we got to respect that and stand with that house. They have the right to make that decision. And so it's just hard for me when I see people who, like, I know belong to house-based cultures, you know, kind of just go right over that whole aspect of our law. And especially, like, you know, when people are getting paid to be saying this constantly in the media and to directly kind of undermine our own governance system. That's...
And also going back to, like, we're talking about outsiders infiltrating or whatever, and it's like, but if the people of that house, of that territory, are inviting them, they have the authority to be there, because that's the authority of that territory is the house. So, and that's what we have done in our history, right? Like, if you want to talk about coexistence, if Canada wants to learn about coexistence, look at Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en, two very different people. You know, we feasted in the summer, they feasted in the winter, totally different languages, but we do share a lot of spiritual and governance beliefs, but with some differences, but very similar, but still coexisting together. Coming together as two different people and supporting each other is another reason why we've, you know, survived this long, right?
Yeah, so. Yeah. And my experience on the Wet'suwet'en territory has always been, like, the most hospitable people. Like, I'm from the Fireweed clan here, and I spent a lot of time with the Wet'suwet'en Fireweed clan, the Laksamasu. And their chiefs told me on many occasions, like, you know, you belong here, you have rights here, you're a part of us. Like, we're one people. And they took care of me very well there. And then, you know, when we've hosted them up here on our territory, in Laksamasu, we had, you know, Zahale and Smolagem come up when we shut down our territory. And likewise, like, my chiefs, Angalubix and I believe Gemlach Skenasit went down to support Zahale. And so it's, you know, that's the thing, like, if we're making it clear, like Vanya said, like, we're sovereign entities, we're houses, like, we decide, you know, who can come onto our territory and who cannot. And so, like, if we're talking about outsiders infiltrating, like, it's these guys you see on the screen right now.
Exactly. I mean, I think I was going to say that, like, I find the whole narrative so ironic, because if you have any sort of, like, basic, and it's pretty public, like, knowledge, like, the extent to which the Crown created a sort of divide and conquer strategy to sow discord, right, when they couldn't get consent, you know, going through all sorts of hoops to, and the company as well, right, of course, showing up with hundreds of millions of dollars on offer to, you know, communities who have been oppressed and actively impoverished by the state, and like showing up, you know, saying, look at all the opportunity, like, in terms of, like, outside, you know, we're talking about, like, you know, LNG Canada, like a consortium of, like, foreign companies, really, that are all behind this whole project, like, this whole, like, outsider narrative, if we really want to talk about,
it's like, yeah,
the
like,
foreign
these
influence.
Guys? We gave them permission to be there.
Yeah.
Look at these guys in the vests.
Yeah.
No idea. I've never seen any of them in my life.
And then, you know, if we were to, like, talk about the impact and the harm of these outsiders in your territory, right, in the Yinta, right, the list would be pretty long.
Yeah. And so we got some good feedback too, because I think this is like, you know, when we're talking about our own community too, it's complex. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, like, we do want to bring people back together. Because that's one thing this project did, was, you know, I've heard from so many of my relatives down there, you know, it just created this huge division. Like, you know, and to me, when I think about, okay, like, the possibility of a pipeline coming through Gitxsan territory, like, you know, like, are we even willing to risk having that happen to our community? Like, I don't want to risk, you know, falling out with my families, my cousins, you know, getting into to battles, and, like, it's just a heavy idea. And, like, is there any amount of money that's worth that?
Oh, it's happening. It's happening, right? It's definitely happened. You get unfriended on social media by your relatives, right, when all this stuff's going down. But some of them, right, and some are on this side, some are on that side. It's definitely there's definitely a wedge, right, and it's I don't know. I just we are kind of divided, I guess. But it's like it's years of traumatization and like the use of religion and the divide and conquer and you know, smallpox was a big part of breaking us down. You know, settlers did give us blankets knowing that there was smallpox on it, right? And then using the religious side of things of like you need to convert or you're not going to get better, you need to go this way or your people, you know what I mean? Like it's just like this years of traumatization accumulated to a point where it's like the government wants to have you in submission, so when all the shit comes through, that it's just like they're just going to push it through and then use the media to show that 23 band councils signed on to it. Like all of the indigenous people agree with what's going on, right? And that's not the case, right? And it all kind of goes back to like the erasure of indigenous people. Like there's First People studies in school, but like I'm talking to my daughter's teacher and she's new to the area. She doesn't know nothing about Wet'suwet'en. She's living on Wet'suwet'en territory. She's teaching on Get 'em Down Wet'suwet'en territory, but they just group us into like a generalization, which I think is just like a political check mark to be like, yeah, we're teaching about First Nations people. Well, there's so many nations, right? Like linguistically we're connected to so many other, but we're all very own, much of our own people, right? So, and some people we're not even linguistically connected to, like Kixan Wet'suwet'en again. But yeah, I just feel like it's all a part of the erasure, and this is just what people are used to, right? And I'm happy to be invited out here so we can get some things out and to clarify things for those that are watching. Yeah. So, and talk shit about some cops for sure.
No, that's what I want to talk shit about.
That's what I was sold on.
Exactly. And it's not always going to be easy too. Like when we're talking about this stuff, because I think every one of us here is a product of genocide. Like we all had to survive that. You know, there was good odds that we wouldn't even be here today.
Yeah,
if any of our ancestors kicked the bucket.
And one thing I want to remind is like we are very much indigenous before you want to identify as Canadian, because if Canada had their way with us, we wouldn't be here talking about this right now. Like this is something that I very much would like to stress, that I'm Wet'suwet'en, I'm Unistoten, he's Gixan, you know, Dene, what nation?
Vantakwitchin.
Yeah, there you go. See, very much we're very much our own people.
Yeah.
And we need to remember that, and we need to hold on to that, because that's what, if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going to go, right? Like, that's something that I'm really reconnecting with as I get older, is, like, really trying to figure out who we are in our own homelands, right? So.
Yeah. No, exactly. I'm glad you're here, Wuk. I'm glad both my Wuks are here. That's Gixan for brother. And Kai, yeah. I know Kai's behind the camera there.
The silent assassin.
Usually I'd be putting Kai right here, because he's got quite the formidable noggin.
Yeah.
We might need an intermission where Kai just comes and
sits
with us.
Yeah, well, we go make some tea. We'll get Kai to entertain everyone for a little bit.
That's not a Captain America hat, is it?
No, this is Asahi. That's the
it's not anarchist, is it?
No, I didn't think of that till I got here.
Okay, wait. Flip the camera around. We've been infiltrated.
Oh no!
Oh shit!
It could be Avenger too. We don't know. Like he could be down with Bruce Banner, right? So.
Asahi.
That was the baseball team in Vancouver.
Yeah, true. Bruce Banner.
Pal Street. It was all Japanese baseball team in the 30s.
There you go. We got the Japanese Alliance right here.
Yeah, exactly. For folks who didn't hear, that's the logo of a Japanese baseball team in the 30s.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it. Do your research.
If your ADD isn't containing you right here, right now, and you got your phone in your hand, just Google it. But then come back to this.
No, exactly. All right, so how about we keep on keeping on with...
One more introduction, though. Who's this cat right
here?
That's
Ninja.
He just came and chilled with us.
Yeah, so Ninja is the result of some, another example of cross-culture exchange.
There you go. What's up, Ninja?
you know, Ninja, I think is actually Quebecois heritage, so people might question that. But.
And if you saw the camera shake like 20 minutes ago, Ninja attacked.
Oh yeah.
Sneak attack.
So for a cat with 0 Japanese ancestry being named Ninja, I'll take responsibility for that. I was probably early years of high school at that point. He's quite the old cat.
That's shinobi appropriation.
It's shinobi appropriation.
So we're okay today.
Yeah.
I'll grant this.
Okay. Kai has given us a pass on shinobi appropriation.
But although my cousin did say that you could, I mean, we used to have our dogs with like chief names and stuff. So
yeah.
There you go.
I'm pretty sure the name that I carried, Hoki'i, at one point was kept alive by being put on a dog, so...
There you go.
I'm proud of that pass. Okay. So we got the whole crew. Actually, do we even introduce...
You want to say
Jackson?
who you are?
Little Eagle?
He's staying anonymous. You don't want to search your
Oh,
profile.
actually, yeah. Let's, everyone forget what I just said. That's our future Gixan leader right here. Okay, continue.
540 kilometers of pipe already in the ground on the project. So this is
Coastal GasLink says the pipeline is now 85% complete, but police believe as long as work on the pipeline continues, the threat of violence here remains. The tunneling under the pure water of Wedzengqua should be finished by June. Where the fight to protect the river goes then is far less clear.
So, Rob, the references to this anarchist movement in your story, in a sense, is movement not a bit of a misnomer here?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I mean, this, by their very nature, this isn't a group of people who join an organization per se, Adrian. It's really a collection of individuals who adhere to and then act on an ideology. Police say that number is very small in Canada. We've been in contact with one such person, originally from Ottawa, now lives in Mexico, where he publishes an anarchist newsletter. This is a guy with a history in Quebec, the States, and BC, was arrested in Wet'suwet'en territory for assault on a police officer with a weapon. That charge stayed. He has yet to answer our direct questions about that worksite attack, Adrian.
Just briefly, it sounds like work on the pipeline is actually pretty advanced. Any sense of when it will be completed?
Company's hoping within the calendar year. This is a project that's faced lots of delays and is way over budget, more than 2 times over the original estimate. Now sits at a cost of $14 billion, Adrian.
All right, Rob Brown in Calgary, thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Here, I'll bring us back to full screen now.
Rob Brown, he's got like 3 different shades of brown on, is really emphasizing on his last name.
Yeah. So the guy they mentioned who, you know, they mentioned it like it was like, assaulted a police officer with, did they say a deadly weapon or just assault with a weapon?
Yeah.
Anyway, that I'm familiar with that story. And apparently the guy was just holding a flagpole when the cops arrested him, and then it was just completely substantiated the charges, so it all got dropped. But, you know, it's funny they got to bring that up. It's like, okay, like, let's just get this. Let's squeeze this in here right at the end. Like, anarchist charged with assault with a weapon.
It reminds me of, you were talking about that Angela Starrett interview with the Gold Commander where there was that one exchange where it was about, he was like, some of my officers have been bitten, and and she was like, wait, so like in this video on this day when they're arresting Denzel, someone like bit, and he's like, well, no, not as part of this operation, but
once upon a time,
once I know of some cops who got bitten
in a different division in a different country.
Yeah.
May have been like a peacekeeper, and it's just like
and then it also like you know, I hope he's fully healed from his traumatic injury, but the officer who stepped on the nail, that's part of this. You know, I remember when the incident first happened, they, you know, were like, it sounded like someone like got assaulted or something. Like, you know, it was like officer down kind of thing, and then like it was like a few weeks later, it's like he stepped on a board with a nail in it, and you know, was treated for his injuries. So.
You know, I got some theories about that. You got an officer walking through a construction site. You know, you got, you know, even like after it was all demolished, you know, like, you know, I have a feeling if there was actual booby traps, like planted, like if they had like, you know, like punji sticks and like, you know, tunnels and,
like,
you know,
a rake.
Yeah, a
Step
rake.
on a rake.
Yeah. Like if there's booby traps, they would have put those pictures out ASAP. Like, look at how violent they are. Like these monsters. Like here's. Oh my gosh, you got cutlery.
Yay! Can I actually?
Cutlery for
I need
pizza.
to be excused for a minute. I need to use a wash.
Oh yeah.
Washing break.
Squeeze out of here. But you know, yeah, no, it sounds like an officer stepped on a nail, and that was the. You know, it's funny because when you read the article that came out after this video piece, like that's the. You know, that's almost what it all boils down to. Like, officer steps on a nail. Like, they keep building it up. Like, okay, you know, like we've identified this threat. We've,
Yeah.
you know, like there's, they've completely taken over and, you know, delegitimized the entire thing, and then there's nothing substantial except for officer steps on a nail. You know,
And damage to property.
I'd question the political ideology of that nail. That's no, I'm pretty sure all 40 of those investigators had that board, you know, strapped down to a chair somewhere, slowly singeing the ends.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think, you know, one of the things is like if anyone's been like reading the news anytime recently, you just know like the RCMP as an institution is like essentially a dumpster fire right now.
Yeah.
You know, just in terms of like the inquiries they had to deal with there out of Nova Scotia, you know, the commissioner resigning, like it's just like a, you know, toxic entity essentially right now. And you don't get any of that context in the story. Like, you know, might the RCMP have particular interests or problems with their image and wanting to legitimize themselves as something that's necessary? You know, a necessary evil in our world is to have this, you know, police force that's been around for, you know, was created to police us, remove us from land, that they're somehow still needed, you know, to police us. You know, I think we need to be paying attention to, like, you know, not only did this come out amidst all of these failures of the RCMP as an institution, but the same day as the RBC AGM.
Yep.
You know, in terms of media exposure to the things that the RCMP or the company don't want to be talked about.
Yeah.
You know, seems quite, I don't know, remarkable that it was just a coincidence that this was, you know, aired around the same time as all of this.
I just saw the camera pan to my cat trying to steal my pizza, and I looked down and but no, you're totally right. Like, why now, out of all times, did they decide to release the information from an incomplete investigation? And you know, it is even information they release. Why did they release kind of these unsubstantiated claims? And you know, so they released all these articles in quick succession immediately after, you know, the Royal Bank of Canada AGM, which we'll get into after. And then I think simultaneously you had a delegation from the band offices going and pretty much speaking in favor of Coastal GasLink, like, you know, pretty much with their rationale being, okay, you know, we don't want this whole project to seem problematic. Like, we want to make sure it looks good before the G7 when they may be making huge decisions that'll impact the future of fossil fuel investments in all the partner countries. And, you know, so there's some timing thing going on here because, you know, it's been so long and just out of the blue they decide to talk about it now. And, you know, if they're weeks away from arrests, like John Brewer was saying, you know, why start talking about it now? It's and I guess, you know, while we're eating our pizza too, I just want to look at the comments. Like, you know, I think there's some good points too, because, you know, we're probably going to talk a bit more about, you know, the nature of the hereditary houses and, you know, the band councils. 'Cause that's like a big undercurrent in this. You know, with the main point though being that we're one people. But I think, you know, we got some comments just basically saying, you know, too, we got to be cautious about, you know, who gets in on these movements, because, you know, we're talking about the boogeyman and this whole idea of movement being hijacked. But, you know, that's, you know, when it comes to movements getting to such a big scale, there's a lot we can't control as houses, you know, people being in solidarity. But then there's also the stuff we can control, you know, and ultimately we just got to be responsible for our territories. And like we were talking about earlier, you know, like when we stand here as sovereign peoples, as part of sovereign house governments, you know, we gotta take care of the land, take care of our guests, take care of everyone. That's a lot of responsibility. And I can see, you know, it gets tricky, like especially when you're dealing with, you know, a lot of people, when you get into a global scale, and when we're basically, you know, a very relatively small demographic within the world, like a pretty small tribe, you know, trying to fight a project and trying to survive. And so I just wanted to address some of those comments, because, you know, I got mad respect for everyone, for all of our family. You know, it's not easy, but, you know, at the end of the day, like, I think what is easy is just addressing, you know, some of these very overt narratives that are being used to basically erase, you know, what's actually happening when it comes to the big fight. You know, when it comes to the land, when it comes to the water, when it comes to, you know, our right to grow up with our culture and our language, which all derives from the land itself. And, you know, our governance, like, our land is our sovereignty. And, you know, we have never ceded it. We have every human right to be there. And, you know, we got to stand up upon our values of our culture. And just to summarize Giksan law, which I think is fairly similar to the Nuknuaten, it's, you got to respect the animals, you got to respect the land, you got to respect the people. That everything that the sun's light touches receives life and warmth equally. So every living thing has a right to life. And we're not supposed to impede that as people. Like, we have a duty to not impede that. You know, getting back to the point too, like where Chris was saying, it's hard to see all the road-killed animals just from increased traffic. Even little things like that, you know, that would be considered like impeding the right to life of the other denizens of the territories that we are responsible for. And, you know, within our hereditary system, like, these values are paramount. All our oral histories, you know, I'm not going to get too deep into the spirituality, but, you know, every living thing has a spirit that watches over it, that has the right to enact vengeance upon the people who, you know, cause harm to that animal and its right to live. You know, whether it's an animal or a river, like, it's all the same. Like in the Delgamuuk Istewi court case, you know, they made it clear, the spirit in the land. That is the basis of our law, the spirit in the land. And so when you see hereditary houses moving to protect their territories, when you see hereditary chiefs who are meant to act in the capacity of enacting the will of their house members, the basis of our government, you know, they're meant to protect the spirit in the land. They're protectors. So, like, I'll even, you know, I think the words hereditary chief are misleading when these are people who are appointed by the houses to be protectors, when their duty is to uphold our law. And I think that's a big part of the conversation that, you know, we really got to start talking about more, because, you know, the more CBC keeps railing on protesters, you know, I feel like it really detracts from that actual, you know, the root of it. Like, why am I there? Mm-hmm. Why are you there? Like, it's not because I hate pipelines.
It's because of your responsibilities, you know.
Yeah,
yeah. No, I definitely think that's a huge part of, like, all of this, like many things, is like you can point to like the way forward being through an understanding and respect for our own laws, right? And, you know, people always, you know, make it sound like it's impossible, like free prior informed consent or implementing, you know, Aboriginal title or Delgamuuk Gistewe, like, you know, like this is just some hard, complex, difficult to define thing when, you know, your laws are, you know, been here for thousands of years, are continuing to be practiced and upheld and, you know, confirmed through, you know, feasts. And, you know, when it comes down to an actual discussion that is actually grounded in your law, you know, like if Rob Brown actually had like an inkling of understanding of, you know, the Nuknuiten, for example, right? Would he just be calling Slato like local protest leader? You know, would he be describing the dispute in the same way? Absolutely not, right? It would begin like, this is a story of trespass, you know, of someone not following the Nuknuiten and disrespecting it, and all of this harm causing, you know, being caused as a result, and there being a need to remedy and make that right. And the discussion would be, you know, under what's owed in law, you know, how is this violation remedied? And, you know, you could talk about in Kitsan law what that remedy might have been a couple hundred years ago, right? Where it was strictly, you know, like trespass, right? Strictly enforced, you know, really underpins, you know, the governance of your territories is the ability to, you know, control who's able to access it and why and for what reason and when, and, you know, that makes the discussion much more real, right? And you just get none of that in most of, you know, the discussion on these issues is, you know.
That's exactly it. Like, you know, with the Giksan and Wet'suwet'en, we have very well defined boundaries, like to our territories, to our houses, to our lachip. You know, a crazy amount of work went into that, especially leading up to the Delgamuuk court case. And, you know, even work went into establishing the boundaries with our neighboring nations, because, you know, the province and Canada, basically they try to find any type of dispute in order to not have to engage with land claims. And so, you know, back in the day, they were very proactive about that. They went and said, okay, look, we have all these agreements with our neighbors that say our external boundaries are this. And so, you know, you can't use that as an excuse anymore of, you know, overlap and this and that. And, you know, this is it. Like the houses, you know, the 13 houses of Wet'suwet'en, the 60 plus houses of the Giksan, you know, we are the sole authority on these territories. And, you know, that's a whole big story that I think, you know, I wish the CBC would actually be able to dive into a bit more. Or, you know, there's some responsible folks who I think have done some work to just actually talk about that and get that out there, because, you know, underpinning this whole conflict is the fact that, you know, we ultimately, you know, I'll call it a victory. Like, we defeated the Crown in the court of law, because prior to that, every single lawyer for the province, every politician, you know, federal, provincial level, they were telling us, okay, in BC, you know, all your rights have been extinguished. You know, without a process, without a treaty, they're just gone. And you get these haphazard little reservations that were basically designated for you going back to the time when this province was pretty much arm of the Hudson's Bay Company. And, you know, so we had to fight that in courts. We had, we laid down all the boundaries. We laid down the adauch, the stories, the histories, why those boundaries have existed. Some of these boundaries have existed since before the pyramids were built in Egypt. Like, these are how old so many of these territories are, how old many of our stories are. Like, these are not something that just came up on a whim. Like, you can't just make up a 10,000-year-old territory. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so we presented that evidence. We got all the, we got direct testimonies from the protectors of our Lachiep, from the hereditary chiefs, the people who were appointed by their houses to go up and speak on these issues, because they were trained in the history and they were trained in the governance of our people. So they went up into the stand, and many of them were very elderly at that time. I think even nowadays, we've got probably like just a couple of the Delgamuukw plaintiffs who are alive still in Giksan territory. And I don't even think there are any left in the Wet'suwet'en territory. And, like the work that generation did was basically to overturn the narrative that our Lachiep and our Yinta no longer exist, because that was the status quo before that court case. Mm-hmm. The government didn't give a rat's butt about, what we were saying. They were pushing through their logging, their forestry, clear cutting. They were fighting us on the rivers, not allowing us to do our fishing. In their eyes, we were relegated to these tiny little reserves, and we had no say over what happened outside of that. And so that was the hereditary houses that did the work and overturned, this act of colonization by one of the biggest empires that ever existed on this planet. So that's a monumental feat in itself, and I've just got so much respect. Yeah, let's get some claps in the chat. Yeah. For those elders and for those chiefs that did that work. Because
you make a, when you're talking, it made me basically, because of that victory, there's basically only one or two ways to undermine the strength of that, and that is through creating conflict, either by this is what the Crown does, right? They find either maybe someone who claims overlapping territory, or they try to create conflict within a nation, so that the full weight of that is sort of dissipated or spread out, right? Mm-hmm. Or frustrated. But the work of your past leaders and elders, right, in terms of how much organizing that was achieved, like Slato's call out for unions. That's not something new, right? Like, your nations were have always been actively sort of engaging labor movements, other movements, to get your story across and get that narrative across in a way that was like, working together with your neighbors who recognize your boundaries, like you said, and internally, two nations, neighboring nations, doing it together. Like, it's such an incredible example, and I think that's why you guys do experience the level of repression you do from the police, is because they've seen an example of like what happens when you are organized, unified, and changing narratives, right? Is like, you can be very, very powerful. And so what's one way to undercut that, right? Crappy CBC articles from Rob Brown.
Yeah, and it's after that court decision, Delgamuukw, if you look at all the newspapers from that era, all the news reporting, like, people were in a panic, because it essentially, like, it read as, okay, now all of BC is considered unceded land. And for all the people who were making a living off of exploiting that land, without any, there was resistance, But now, like, there was a resistance at the legal level where they were doing their business. And so they immediately approached the provincial government, and they pretty much said, okay, you know, we need a solution now. Like, and I think it was a Narwhal article that released this maybe a year ago, where they were saying, okay, we need a strategy for ultimately getting around the rights and title of the native people on the land, because, you know, this was a big wrench thrown in their whole colonial system. Because our chiefs, like, I just can't understate it, the work that went into that. And, you know, some people try to frame it as, okay, no, we were appealing to them for recognition, which was not the case at all, because, you know, we stand on our own merits as houses within our own law, and that's something that'll never change. You know, it doesn't matter, regardless, whatever the crown law is. You know, we are the authorities on our territories. But, you know, what we did there was we dominated them in their own game. You know, we went in and destroyed their argument as to why, you know, they could justify continuing the destruction of our land without our, you know, without any consent. And, you know, that's a tricky fight, because, you know, at the end of the Delgamuukw court case, you could probably talk about this a bit more, is, you know, even though they recognized, you know, again, that language of recognition, I don't even necessarily like that. But even though they were forced to acknowledge within their law that, you know, our title, our rights, you know, completely predated Canada, had nothing to do with the crown, you know, they still snuck in little disclaimers saying that, you know, we can figure out justifiable infringements. You know, like, and that's what we've seen this entire time. All these justifications for infringing are the sanctity of our territories and our governance. And, like, you see that with these injunction cases, you know, where they basically say, okay, we're going to make this decision on, you know, taking into account the public interest. You know, what is the public interest? Because as far as we've ever known, the public interest has always stood in stark contrast to our interests as Indigenous peoples. You know, even though, like, we may be counted as citizens under Canada, like, against our will for the most part, you know, we are never counted within that public interest, and we're constantly shut out of any dialogues regarding what the interest of the public may be. And yeah, you know, there's just so many pitfalls that get baked in that, you know, we constantly got to fight there. But, you know, the real fight, because, you know, a lot of that stuff just boggles my mind. I don't even want to bother, like, trying to understand the rationale for continuing to profit off of a genocide. Like, that's kind of not the headspace I want to be in. But, you know, so, you know, the ground that we've got to stand on is the ground of our law, like we were describing before.
Yeah.
You know, the values, the governance, the culture.
And I think, you know, you talked about, you know, all these justifications, you know, the doctrine of discovery has been in the news, you know, like, oh, you know, this horrible doctrine, you know, what, you know, if you boil it down, right, you know, cut away the religious stuff, like, it's basically a way of relating to us that's based on this, like, really dehumanizing standard that we don't have our own law. Like, that's like the base of the relationship is, you know, you don't have any law of your own, and that's part of the justification of us, like, you know, asserting our authority and doing what we want anyways. And, you know, you mentioned injunctions, you know, like that, what more is, you know, consistent with the doctrine of discovery than, you know, an injunction proceeding in these types of cases where they're just like, we don't want to hear anything about your law, or like who owns the land, like that doesn't matter. Let's, like,
calculate how many jobs will be lost and like what's the dollar value of that. It's a continuation of the doctrine in practice, right? Which, like, that's what I care about. I don't really care too much what the Pope says. Like, I want it to actually stop being enacted, right, within Canadian law, which, happens in all of these ways, whether it's, in the pipeline's approvals process, the consultation process, the police enforcement of these injunctions, the issuing of the injunctions. It really is all about, like, head in the sand, despite all the evidence to the contrary. It's like, pretending you still don't exist, right? Pretending that you didn't prove what you proved, by putting your Adawak and, the Kunga, before the, colonizer courts to say, here's all the law you say we don't have, right?
Yep. And on that point too, like, this seems to be an area where our politicians are really lacking, because, like, it's clear where the problems are with their system. The root of this issue, the root of this struggle, is the lack of consent of the title holders on the territories. Like, this pipeline being pushed through on the bare minimum justifications. And, like, with these injunction proceedings, they could file a lawsuit against, a handful of people, throw Jane and John Doe on there, and then a couple of years later they've got a giant sign with the entire injunction written on it by the side of the road that's automatically injunctioning everybody who goes onto that territory, regardless of your affiliation or background. And yet that original lawsuit is never brought to fruition. And, I learned a lot from Chris over the years about injunctions, and it kind of made it abundantly clear that, all of that evidence from the Delgamuukw court case was never put on, on the table, because an injunction is like a very basic, quick, temporary measure in order to maintain the status quo while the lawsuit is ongoing. And yet somebody thought it'd be a great idea within our court of law to be able to allow the lawsuit to never happen. And so then, all that evidence saying that this is Wet'suwet'en Yintah, belonging to the Wet'suwet'en houses in their respective territories, that is never allowed to be brought forward in the court of law, which doesn't make a lick of sense. And so I think that's where these politicians now in Victoria, like, if they had, because I'm just tired of their lip service. I'm tired of, them and all their cop-outs, because, they can address injunction law. They can address, their funding of the police. There's so many places where they have the ability to intervene in this situation that is causing a lot of harm and a lot of division within our communities. Like, it's like how can they just sit there and ignore it all is just kind of like my question as an ethical human being. Like, I think the things that you could address are pretty clear and straightforward, especially when we're not just talking about some demographic minority within Canada. We're talking about, a very well established unceded territory belonging to a government that has never given up its rights to self-govern, its rights to self-determination, all of that. And so, at any point they could step in. There's all this talk of nation to nation, nation to nation. But meanwhile, they operate like, okay, this is just, they operate as if we did not have any of those rights. They operate as if we're not a sovereign people. And, I think, something's got to budge along those lines, because you know this conflict will keep happening over and over and over if they keep sticking their head in the sand, like you were saying. And like this pipeline would not be the last, and then we have to continuously deal with the repercussions, you know, not just of industry, but what this conflict brings to our communities. We have to deal with, you know, the trauma. We have to deal with, you know, the stress. And then meanwhile, you know, as houses, we have plans for our land. You know, we have livelihoods that depend on these lands, these lachiep. And, you know, we don't have the time or the energy to be actually coming up. Like, we're solution-oriented people. We're survivors. We're some of the longest continuously existing societies that have ever occurred on planet Earth. Like, you know, I saw a correction in the chat that that someone was saying that the pipelines actually might be older than 10,000 years old. I mean, not pipelines, the pyramids. Oh, ancient pipelines. But the pyramids might be older than 10,000. So, you know, I might not be up to speed on my Egyptology. But, you know, 10,000 years, you know, which I would consider a minimum of, like, when it comes to our oral histories and the corroborated geological evidence, like, that's a long time. And, you know, I just, you know, it's a lot to constantly be dealing with this. Like, I want to be growing food out on the territory. You know, we're going to be doing that. We're going to be building homes for all the homeless people that the band councils can't provide homes for. You know, we got like so many issues that we got to deal with where money is not the solution. And we just got to get people back out to the land. We got to get people back involved with our governance, with our houses, with our language, with our culture, because, you know, it's that identity, that belonging, that continuity, that vision that's always been there for us. That, you know, colonization has severed a lot of those ties. You know, it took me a while. Like, you know, I grew up here. I was confused a lot about the world. I went, traveled around. I came back. Then I realized finally, like, what such a treasure we have here in our communities. And, you know, ever since, like, my heart's been with this struggle. But I don't want it to be a struggle. You know, like, these kids right here, this young eagle. That's who I'm fighting for. Like, my daughter, who's a young wolf. That's who I'm fighting for. Like, it's, you know, like, I just, we need the time, the energy, the space, the respect to be able to get stuff done. And, you know, if industry just keeps hammering at us, keeps, you know, dividing us, keeps, you know, getting in here into our people with all their different offers and their non-disclosure agreements and making things complicated, and, you know, writing into their agreements with the band offices that, you know, terms like irrevocable consent, like, what the hell does that even mean? Like, and saying that you got to monitor your own people on social media, and like, you know, you have to engage in court actions against your own people. Like there's so many tools they put in there to deliberately cause these fights. And, you know, it gets tiring, because at the end of the day, like, we just want to live our lives. It's, you know, it's the wild part about it all. And like, at least in my heart, that's why I hope people, you know, support the indigenous struggles in the North, because they recognize our humanity. They recognize what it might be like to be in our shoes one day. And, you know, that's what it's all about. It's for the children. Just like Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang is for the children. DB.
Yeah.
Back again. Sorry, my allergies are acting up. Yeah. Seasonal allergies.
Seasonal allergies.
Just springtime.
Someone said to shout out whoever made the pizza. And that's my lovely wife, Rebecca.
It's delicious.
No, it's really awesome pizza. Homemade dough, homemade everything.
It was really good. Was it Sheldon? That's my cousin.
Oh yeah, it's your cousin on there looking at the chat.
Hey, Sheldon.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to mention while we're still streaming is one thing that CBC piece just briefly mentioned, and they called it a probe, but that like John Brewer's outfit, right, CERG, like they're under some systemic review investigation, right, for all of their conduct, not just in the Yinta, but Fairy Creek and a few other places. But like I don't know what to expect from that type of review process, but people are calling for abolish CERG, and you were talking just about the real life impacts, right? All this has on just your own family, your own will alone, right? Like you don't want to be having to deal with like militarized cops on your territory. You'd rather be looking out for people's well-being, but like the fact that there is this unit that just exists, like the idea that there's this police unit that basically exists for when indigenous people, self-determining people say no. Like do you really have self-determination then? Do you really have freedom?
And then the blatantly ignoring what was decided.
Yeah, right. Like people talk about consent and implementing UNDRIP. Well, this is like the proving ground right here.
And then also on the other side, bragging about how Canada is so full of multiculturalism, right? And it's kind of it's not really like that, really, unless it's like your culture's from Europe, right?
Yeah. Well, it still ticks me off. There's only 2 recognized languages. Anyway, like I honestly don't even. Whatever, Canada, they can do their thing. Screw that. But yeah, CERG, like.
Kurg.
Oh, Kurg. Okay,
I think
I've been calling them CERG since before.
Yeah, the native pronunciation is CERG.
Yeah,
that's how we've been. That's how I've been calling it. You've been calling it CERG.
Yeah,
that's how you say it in your native tongue.
Well, I'm pretty sure that they don't like it when you call it CERG, so that's the reason I want to keep calling it.
They might not
CERG.
also like it if you call them mercenaries. So I've heard. So if you want to call them mercenaries, I mean, I'm not saying they're mercenaries, but I've heard them referred to as mercenaries. So maybe Google that too.
The Colonial Industry Retribution Gang, CERG. It's well you're talking about, there's the probe, the whole investigation going into them and their conduct. Like what's alleged, like you have like harassment, you have like
torture, pain compliance methods.
Like surveillance, like violations of people's rights, like violations of charter rights.
Oh, and I wanted to mention this because I feel like they get let off a lot, but like Forsyth, the other private security companies out there, like these are all like, if you look into their history, like they were started around the same time as CERG. Like it's like almost like they had this 2-pronged strategy, like, okay, we're gonna have these private security guys that maybe aren't as regulated as our national police force
that couldn't quite make it as police officers.
Yeah, and
so they got to prove it now.
Some of them are like ex-military guys, a lot of them are ex-cops, but there's recently an article, I think, in the Intercept about the No DAPL pipeline, and they just got this treasure trove of documents from a court process about all the private security that were involved there, and like a lot of consistency, I think, with what people have experienced with CERG and the private security. So I think, again, something that just blows my mind, the idea that there's just like these essentially more or less mercenaries hired by TransCanada, contracted, that are apparently licensed by the province, but like when you ask them what they do, they just say, I'm a private investigator.
What's wild about that too, when you're talking about, was it with No DAPL and some of the stuff that came out there, is you think security, they're there to monitor the situation and, protect the assets. But then you start to see all these documents coming out where no, like they've got like entire counterinsurgency strategies and like public opinion strategies.
Yeah.
Like where they're actively, going out of their way to like go well beyond the realms of being a bodyguard, but actually get into the realms of like, okay, how do I take down a movement that's in opposition to my employer? And then like in these major companies, these oil and gas companies, like they have experience with this all around the world, putting pipelines through Africa, putting pipelines through, really heated areas where, things have escalated way beyond what we've seen here. And so they've got experts from all these theaters that come together, like, Serg, I'm pretty sure even Gold Commander, from what I remember, he had some kind of...
Yeah, he was in Afghanistan, border policing.
And if we're gonna go back to South Africa, was it Judge McEachran was like a police chief? The first, like when Gitsan Wet'suwet'en first wanted to bring the case to the lower court system, it was Judge McEachran, but he was like a police chief in South Africa, I'm pretty sure. And so he's the one determining like, okay, like pretty much saying we're primitive people and we don't have no rights to anything, and that's why I went to the Supreme Court of Canada, because this guy was like police chief in South Africa. Like,
fun fact, he was also, before he was a judge, he was a lawyer who worked at the same firm that was arguing against you guys in Delgamuukw.
Oh, really?
For the province hired this firm, and he used to, so like
Talk
basically his old buddies
perfect placement
from the firm were arguing the case before him. So and funny enough, the same law firm that Coastal GasLink now uses today.
And these are just all facts, and this is just stuff we're pointing out because there's a few things I want to clarify. Is like, I introduced who I am and where I'm from, but I'm not speaking for my clan or my house right now. I'm just giving you my personal opinion, and also just like, we're giving out facts here is all it is, right? The mistreatment of indigenous people, and calling it out is what it is, right? And going on, like, I have relatives working on the pipeline, right? I'm not like against them. I understand, like, we have to, like, we're working for money, right? Like, we need money to keep the lights on and whatnot and whatever, right? So it's not like I'm not here attacking people to try and further divide. I just feel like we're just being vocal about how we feel about this. Well, I am for sure. Yeah. Because it's we're trying to get that unity back, and the only way to get unity is understanding, right? And I just wish more of our people would understand that we are being undermined with our system that has kept us alive for thousands of years, right? So that's something that I want to clarify right now and just call out the bullshit, right? So
well said. No, good. Well said, well said. It's oh, okay. Yeah, so we got a message from our homie behind the screen. So I think we should probably, I this next part, I've been kind of debating whether or not, we should dive into it, but I think it's important, like, if we're going to be talking about, the ways in which historically, movements, or I don't even want to say movements, but like entire peoples and their human rights struggles have been undermined and demeaned. Like, something that just came to my mind right away was, the civil rights movement. When you look at what happened in the States, because, what triggered that for me is when you look at the headline that came up in the CBC article, "When Anarchists Attack." Like that's that's, what's the word, like dog whistle. That's like meant to elicit a certain response. And so when I did a Google search to try to find out, okay, where else has this terminology been used, immediately I came across this anti-civil rights movie from 1966. And right off the bat, here, I'll just play like the intro here, where it just, you can read their definition. And just for some context too, like it's basically, it was a strategy they used at that time to try to put down the black people and their movement, you know, for their freedom, for their dignity. And their whole idea was, like their movement's been infiltrated by like these anarchist elements and these communists who are planning to enslave the world. And at the time in the States, everyone was just deathly afraid of communism. And so I'll just play this intro because it just speaks for itself about, you know, like the kind of language. Like this is, you know, my people come from a reincarnation culture. So I'm thinking maybe Gold Commanders.
Us too.
Hey.
It's like that book. Did you read it?
Yeah.
Did you read the book yet?
I did.
Because I need to read it. So.
Yeah. Man, you lent me a book on reincarnation, so I've got to
give that back. And a dope cover by Ken Mowat.
Heck yeah.
Was it Ken Mowat?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a wicked good sound artist.
So let me figure out this OBS here. Let's news reading.
Anarchy, the breakdown of law and order, a chaotic reign of terror, mob rule and rioting, the collapse of government authority. These phrases ring strange in the ears of Americans, and for good reason. Through the years, America has stood as the world symbol for law and order. Our government is responsive to the will of the people. Our courts and legislatures provide the mechanics for a peaceful redress of grievances. And the policeman on the corner has traditionally been looked upon as a friend, not as the instrument of a tyrant. Anarchy, well, that was something we read about in our newspapers that was always happening in other countries. Perhaps the people in other countries had just reasons to riot against their governments. After all, many of the nations of the world are dictatorships in one form or another. What business was it of ours, anyway? Newsworthy, perhaps, but it could never happen here. Then, in the summer of 1964, widespread rioting and looting suddenly broke out in Harlem, in Rochester, in Newark, in Jersey City, in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Chicago, all within a few days of each other. It was as though an unseen hand had given the signal. Then, on August 18th, 1965, guns replaced nightsticks in the hands of law enforcement officers as the Watts area of Los Angeles literally burst into a cauldron of insurrection. Thousands of rioters roamed the streets both night and day, smashing and looting, and setting the torch to over 50 square miles of the city. Hidden snipers held police and firefighters at bay as fires raged unabated. At least 35 Americans died in the violence and gunfire. The sheer magnitude of this monstrous madness strained the abilities of the civil authorities, and the California National Guard was sent to Watts with orders to quell the violence with brute force if necessary. The spectacle of American soldiers shooting it out with American civilians was even more shocking than the rioting itself. The nation was stunned and horrified. No smugness now. This time it wasn't a foreign country. This time it was Anarchy USA.
This
So-
time it was Anarchy USA.
So what do you know, that sounds kind of familiar, hey? Like a lot of those points that were introduced.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, like it's the exact same narrative.
That can't happen here. It's America.
Yeah, you know, like, we got the rule of law, the courts, they made their decisions, and
yeah, that riot must have just came out of nowhere. I don't know what was happening there.
well, it's the unseen hand of outside agitators.
Oh, there you
know,
go.
pulling all the strings, you know, making the naive, childlike natives.
Nothing to do with human rights violations and mistreatment
nothing.
of people of color, right? Oh.
You know, it's wild. So, yeah. What are your thoughts on that? That kind of blew me away because I was just looking for like a simple generic clip on like some propaganda, but then I just kind of saw like the exact same trend. And I got another clip right after this, from this. It's like it's a really gross movie, so I want to show the minimum amount that I can, because they literally have like, they're talking about like, oh, the opposing sides, and like, let's hear everyone's opinion. They got like Ku Klux Klan rallies, and they're like broadcasting them, and then basically just going on to denounce like the entire civil rights movement. And I have a feeling going into the future, that's kind of going to be, when we look back on all this and say like, okay, like, yeah, there's some very blatant violations of human rights going on here. Like, how could anyone have justified that in the past? And, like, similarly, this piece from 1966, like, a lot of the people probably shared these exact sentiments. Like, oh, there's no problems here. America's great. There's nothing to worry about. Everyone loves our police. Everyone loves, our court of law.
Land of the free.
Land of the free. Crazy shit happens everywhere else. It's wild.
I mean, it's like such a worn out trope of like the outside agitator. Like, if you like follow any like historical issue, where there's some sort of non-violent resistance in response, if that ever is escalated or whatever, like there's always this trope, like, black people looting in the streets, oh, there must be outside agitators, people just might, it's not possible that people are just so upset with like the racist oppressive conditions they're living within that they just might smash like a store window, like, oh, like, like we need to invent some boogeyman to like, some outsider, these, like you say, naive locals couldn't possibly have a grievance that's legitimate.
Sort of like the brainwashing of like people legit being more upset with property damage than actually mistreating humans, right? That's
well, that's it's pretty unreal, and it just erases like the actual work that went into the background. How many people fought for civil rights, and then you just say, oh, it's this mastermind threat that's threatening all of our values as a society.
Well, I think that's why it's so powerful that like Indigenous people have their own media, like ways of sharing our version of events and facts, like this, right? Like, because like they create these narratives because they realize like we have to convince the public. Like, they could send the military in any one of our territories any day, and that would be the end of it, essentially, right? Like, some days, like, I'm grateful that they're literally like not dropping bombs on us like they are in other parts of the world, right? Like, where they're taking resources, but they need some way to control the story and make you out to be an enemy, essentially, right? Like, or to justify their own, repression when they mete it out, right? And so, like, I just think we always need to be very mindful of that, like
the old divide and conquer.
Like, it's everywhere, and like we need to. The only way to counter that is to make sure we are telling our truths, telling our stories on the ground, and what we're witnessing. Like, Jackson, he's 7 years old. He's witnessed an injunction being enforced, right? Like, you can't tell him that like CERG is something that it's not, because he's experienced it directly, right? Already at his age, right? Like,
where was that at?
It was in Newtown.
Newtown?
Yeah, like, CERG with big assault rifles and helicopters, and it's like
coming after unarmed Indigenous people.
Yeah, like
on our own land.
Like, you can't
It's kind of wild.
Yeah, like you can't erase that from your memory.
Right
or...
downtown, right?
Downtown. Right downtown.
Yeah.
Right by the gas station.
They were letting kids out of the elementary school, and there was guys in full-on army fatigues with assault rifles and snipers.
Crazy.
And, this is in the middle of a town. Like it's. Yeah, no, that was pretty unreal. And like when I. You see a lot of the other extreme end of the argument, people trying to criticize, like, okay, anyone who, presents any type of minor inconvenience to, Canada's infrastructure is a terrorist. Like, in my mind, the people who show up with guns to basically put down, anyone who is standing up for their rights, their given rights as a Giksan or as a Wet'suwet'en. Like that's terrorism. And it's got a political motive to it. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going there to try to instill fear into people so that they don't come back and try to resist you again. Like, why go so over the top when over and over, you constantly hear about like the RCMP threat assessments before they go and raid. There's no risk of anyone shooting back at us. We've never seen anything to indicate that, we'll actually be in any danger. But still, we're going to go in with dogs and carbines and snipers and helicopters, and we're going to go full, flight of the Valkyries on these natives. And why do they do that? It's, it's to instill fear. Like when we were talking about Serg's probe, I think another one to mention is just their psychological warfare. Yeah. Their stimming tactics, what they do to try to, just put a strain on people's minds and sanity. Even when they were broadcasting snippets of horror movie shows, where you got people just out in the bush, radios are their only lifeline. That's your emergency communications. Meanwhile, they're cutting everything up, isolating you, getting ready to burst in with axes and chainsaws, and they're playing shit on the radio I see you.
And denying it.
Yeah, and they're denying it. And it's on camera. It's on the public record. It's online. Yeah. And that's some messed up stuff. But you seriously got to be so into playing John Wayne that you're gonna come up with something like that when these injunction orders, they leave a lot of discretion into how they're enforced. And yet, how does it turn into this? What factors? What factors within the RCMP lead to just this absolute excess of force and violence? Yeah. And just the terror that they try to instill.
And this is all history repeating itself, with the gold rush back in the day, coming into our villages and and just really motivated by making the big bucks and mistreating the local indigenous people. You can look that up in one of our Wet'suwet'en history books, and you can find them in Smithers. You can find them probably on Amazon. The stories are right in there. This is nothing new, right? This is all. When is it going to change? Is the question. When is that mistreatment going to change, right? So.
Yeah, and that's. I don't know. Look at us. We're just a bunch of uncles sitting on a couch, trying to throw our 2 cents in, hoping for change.
With the Goku medallion.
Yeah, Goku.
Won this off Facebook. Look at that.
Kakarot.
How do you say this? Is it? I got it on a Facebook raffle. I'll let you attempt that.
Makwa Ikwe.
Designs. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Makwa. It sounds like bear, out east, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got some dope pendants, so.
Nice, yeah. Shout out.
She does raffles.
You got the zoom in on the.
It's not Super Saiyan, but it's still Goku, right?
Hey.
You like Super Saiyan Goku?
Kinda.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear the future generations know Dragon Ball Z. That intergenerational transfer of wealth is in progress.
Who else we shout now? Look at this, Michelle Stoney.
Yeah, Michelle Stoney.
Gitsan artist. She did the cards, the Gitsan cards, playing cards.
Strike and stick, my wife.
Sasquatch. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. See?
Yeah.
Is this the shout out time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Might as well jump into that. Then we'll get into some RBC stuff.
I'd like to shout out Katie, my girlfriend, for making a wicked dinner for my birthday yesterday and making like homemade everything, homemade banana cake, and it was awesome, so much appreciated. Super good. You guys missed out.
Happy birthday.
So remember that for next year.
Yeah. I'm a hummy scat.
Thank you.
Yeah, we actually...
Hello.
Hanimi, can you say happy birthday, Vanya?
It's his birthday.
I'll just say hey. That's okay.
Just eating their pizza.
Shout out Dave McKay, CEO of RBC.
Oh yeah.
For segregating you in Saskatoon.
We're gonna get into that. Okay. I think that'll be our final piece. I'll probably cut some of the other parts short because we're going on. Jeez, we're going on 2 hours and 42 minutes.
Almost
for the people who stuck around, you're hardcore.
If we had prizes, you'd definitely be getting them, but we don't today. Maybe next time.
Maybe next
Tune in
time.
next time.
This is literally an operation held together by strings. So, and like was mentioned, we're just here to share. Share what we got. Like we're here for the people. We're here for the big picture. We're here out of love for our communities. Like we just want our people to be happy, and it's like we keep hitting the same wall over and over and over and over, and maybe this is just one of the ways we can get that message out there of what's going on. Maybe change things up, because it gets tiring, and our people have been dealing with this for too long, and we need some more hearts and minds together on this. Find those solutions.
I'm just gonna fall.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We're not done yet, Ben.
Oh, we're not done? Okay. Well, I'm just going to give thanks anyway.
No, retract that. That's just kidding. Yeah. So, just quickly, I want to touch on RBC because we had RBC in the intro there. So I've got some clips that were
boring.
I've got some clips that were sent to us from the AGM. So some context. Not too long ago, the Royal Bank of Canada, which has recently been crowned as the #1 financier of fossil fuels globally.
#1.
Yeah, they beat out some big fish like Chase. Whoop.
Shout out to former National Chief Phil Fontaine.
Oh yeah.
Special advisor to RBC.
Yeah, shout out.
You are red washing #1 fossil fuel financer in the world.
Where's he from?
I don't know, Phil. Where's he from? I don't know, but someone should talk to their uncle.
Yeah, I think so.
Someone call your uncle.
Philly.
So we're gonna share a bit from the AGM. So this is gonna be, some of the. So for some context leading up to this, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip introduced a shareholder resolution that was to be voted on by all the shareholders of the Royal Bank of Canada. And this resolution basically asked for the implementation of free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to RBC deciding which projects they're going to finance. And so now I'm going to play the audio from the supporting comments that were made from the crowd. Some people might be familiar, but yeah, let's dive right into it. So mind the technical stuff again.
Denny's 8U, Chaka's 8U, Sky's 8. I am Chief Namox. I am a hereditary chief of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I am here as a proxy holder. I'd like to ask a question and a statement, and then also give you an update. We, the Wet'suwet'en people, we have 22,000 square kilometers of unceded non-treaty lands. We have 5 clans and 13 houses. This is our governance system. Always has been, always will be. Each house group and clan is responsible for caretaking the land for future generations for the betterment of all. We've proven our jurisdiction and authority in the Supreme Court of Canada, the Debunking Stay-Away Court case, and that ruling came down December 11, 1997. We are unique. We've never ceded nor surrendered our rights and title. British Columbia and Canada only have assumed and presumed authority on our lands. Coastal GasLink pipeline does not cross any of the reserve lands that are in support of this pipeline. It crosses the Wet'suwet'en land, and this is who the houses, the clans, the chiefs are responsible for. Communities supporting this pipeline don't see the impacts to our lands and waters, our rights and title, our very human existence. I was here last year in Toronto at the AGM. You dismissed our struggle as being merely reflecting divisions. How dare you dismiss this? Dismiss me, a chief of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, as being marginal within my own nation, suggesting that there's just divisions that somehow warrant you ramming a pipeline through my backyard, when you know divide and conquer has always been the playbook for people such as yourselves. We are the title holders. Coastal GasLink requires our free, prior, and informed consent. They do not have it, Mr. Mackay. Shareholders should support this resolution. If this policy were in place and actually adhered to, it would help prevent RBC financing these illegal pipelines. I would be in the room with you. They, since us coming here to Saskatoon, has segregated us, put us into another room. Such a racist act. They've actually laid hands on me, a Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief, on my regalia, just now, from speaking to you and looking you in the eye. You've heard my statement. This is all we're here, to tell the truth. And yet your violence that you fund has come to us again the same way it has on our lands. You need to stand up and stop this violence, stop funding this violence, and stop acting in such a violent way to all Indigenous people, and quit attacking land, air, water, the very democracy of this country. You have offended a High Chief, Mr. Mackay. I hold you personally responsible for this. Messiah.
Thank you, Chief Nomax, for your comments. I see there's another person lined up at microphone 4. We'll go to you next. Thank you.
So, just for some context, like there was Namox and there was Gistewe who went to attend this Royal Bank of Canada AGM. I was one of the people who also attended, you know, on behalf of my family and my will, and in order to support. And there was a good delegation of other Wet'suwet'en folks, as well as folks who were supporting these motions and organizing for, I guess, us to be functioning as shareholder proxies. So in accordance with the rules of the AGM, you know, we were able to go in there to introduce a resolution and to speak to those resolutions. And all these speeches were heard directly by every shareholder of the Royal Bank of Canada who is attending the AGM online or in person, but also the executives of the Royal Bank of Canada. But right off the bat, you know, just a little anecdote, we went in there and, you know, just myself, I gave them my name. I'm a proxy holder. They lost all my paperwork. They didn't have it. The next proxy holder beside me, they lost all their paperwork. They didn't have it. And it just kept happening over and over and over. And I saw an RBC lady standing right beside us, and she just looked over and was like, hey, they're not shareholders. Like, we gotta get them out of here. And then we had another kind fellow come up from behind who had a folder with all of RBC's own paperwork that was authorizing us as the proxy holders, all the official forms. And so they very reluctantly gave us our passes to go into the AGM. Because, you know, we were following the rules, everything that was set out well beforehand. Right away, before we were about to go up the stairs to where the AGM was, because it was in a hotel with a conference area that encompasses, I think, about 3 different floors in that hotel. You know, a few of the RBC folks came over and said, "Oh, sorry, the main room is full. We can't fit you in there. There was a lot more people than we expected. It's just full. You just missed the deadline, apparently." And then, you know, and then quite a few of the Wet'suwet'en folk I was with were like, you know, let's go see for ourselves. And so they went upstairs, and then they walked up to, there's a bunch of security guys in front of the one of the rooms, and they were like, "Yeah, this is your room. Come in here." And then we looked again, and it was just an empty room with like a couple of TV screens at the front, just a billion empty chairs, and a single microphone where you'd pretty much be talking to a wall. And so then, you know, we kind of realized, okay, you know, maybe we've been duped with this being the main room, because this isn't it. And so they went upstairs again, and there was the even more security. This floor actually had coffee and food and like refreshments and, you know, the nice stuff you might want to supply your shareholders and proxy holders with if you're, you know, conducting an annual general meeting. And then immediately upon trying to walk in to the main meeting area, one of the security guys just jumped out, and he just hard palmed Namox. Like he pushed him right on his regalia. He shoved his blanket. And, you know, that immediately set everyone off. Like that was, you know, a very taboo move when, you know, the choke point to get into the AGM was probably about that wide with like 3 or 4 security guys filling that gap. Like no one's going to get through there. You don't need to physically lay your hands on someone. And so things got a little heated for a moment, and then, you know, another RBC guy comes around the corner and he starts telling me, "Oh, well actually the room downstairs, that's for proxy holders, and you're all proxy holders, so you have to go to that room." And then I'm thinking, okay, like is the room full, or is it because we're proxy holders? And then I look at the wall, and there's a poster outlining the venue and all the different rooms in the events, and it says overflow room. And then after, another RBC employee comes out and says, "Oh, actually all your tags are color coded, and you guys have little yellow stripes on your tags, so you have to go to the other room. That's the yellow stripe tag room." And this just went on and on.
It's
and
like the pass system.
How to segregate in 2023.
Yeah.
And so they basically had their AGM.
No, it's just yellow.
Yeah, we're the yellow stripes. So basically,
This is different.
they had the room with all their executives, all the shareholders and proxy holders who were drinking their coffee and eating their snacks. They had a room on an entirely different floor that was just full of native people and people of color. And so yeah, like right off the bat, that's what Namox is talking about when he says, yeah, like I'm talking to you from our segregated room. Come on. He likes his pizza. He's a pizza ninja. And so that set the tone for the whole meeting. And you know, especially you got to consider too that they had already changed the entire venue from Toronto to Saskatoon, which was, you know, kind of a deliberate move just to dodge the Wet'suwet'en, who they knew were coming. The previous year, I think Namox, Gustave, and Medik all flew to attend their AGM, and then they canceled the AGM after they arrived in Toronto, I think, or whatever city it was taking place in. And so, you know, it's Dave McKay, after all this, the CEO of RBC, he talks a great deal about you know, in his response to all these questions, he starts saying, you know, like, we pride ourselves on our dialogue and our working relationships. And, you know, meanwhile, 2 years in a row, he's avoided meeting the people face to face who he's responsible as the, you know, since RBC is the primary financier of Coastal GasLink for the degradations of their homelands. And so I'm gonna quickly roll into the next one. We'll wrap it up pretty quick. But this next part is Eugene Kung from, I think, West Coast Environmental Law, who does another supporting statement in favor of the free, prior, and informed consent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Eugene Kung. I am a proxy holder joining you here today from the second class room downstairs. I want to acknowledge the Treaty 6 territory and the homelands of the Cree, Stoney, Blackfoot, and Métis peoples. I see in the proxy circular RBC's reliance on the Equator Principles as a way to address this material risk that this shareholder proposal aims to address. And I want to speak to that specifically to shareholders so that they understand clearly that the Equator Principles for the most recent version is inadequate to address these material risks that are being undervalued by RBC. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a minimum standard which incorporates the right to free, prior, and informed consent. And the Equator Principles, in short, makes a mockery of that. And adherence to that alone is not going to address the risks to the company, the reputational risks that you are already facing, let alone future compliance risks that were spoken about earlier. The Equator Principles tried to relegate free, prior, and informed consent to a procedural right rather than a substantive right. They are reactive instead of proactive. In other words, they're the exact opposite of what a bank who is serious about reconciliation, who's serious about climate change, and who's serious about respecting Indigenous rights should be taking. So I want to just make that very clear to shareholders that they should not take comfort in reference to the Equator Principles. They are inadequate. And we just saw yesterday another human rights grievance filed by an Indigenous group in the Tiwi Islands for the Barossa gas project, which RBC is part of the funding for. So the current practices are clearly not working to address these. And it's very frustrating to see this doubling down on these practices and to see this segregation that's happened here at the annual meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments, questions on proposal number 2?
Okay, this is where I jump in right after Eugene. And just for some clarification, I had to Google Equator Principles, but it's a financial industry benchmark for determining, assessing, and managing environmental and social risk.
ESG.
ESG. You know, it sounds like something you put in your food to give it a little bit of a salty kick. Anyway.
I do.
Okay. All right. This guy might
I see microphone number 4 again. Can you hear us well?
I can hear you well.
Over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So my name is Colin Sutherland Wilson, and I am here as a proxy holder. And you speak of a balanced and just transition. And I think it's important to question what is just. Because in more cases, often than not, when we refer to the common interest, Indigenous peoples are left out of the equation and are often seen as those who inhibit the progress of the larger states in which they reside. And so, in addressing the current climate emergency and in addressing the issues of free, prior, and informed consent, RBC continues to finance fossil fuel projects such as Coastal GasLink, that have been repeatedly condemned at an international level for Indigenous rights violations. So my question is, do you recognize the fact that continuing to finance projects that do not meet the bare minimum standards of free, prior, and informed consent presents a grave risk to your investments? And we can see this as evidenced by the rising costs of projects such as TMX and Coastal GasLink. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Indeed, as well set out by the board in the proxy circular, we're well aware of the issues associated with our work in this area.
Yeah,
You didn't need to come tell us that, Colin. We're well aware of.
We know what we're doing.
I mean, that just kind of makes it worse. Like, oh no.
We totally know it.
We know what we're doing. We know, you gotta crack a few eggs to make an omelet,
Yeah. So RBC, I guess when they were doing the vote online with their I guess with their program they were doing it with. I really stumbled trying to explain that. But when they were doing the vote, they recommended to all their shareholders to vote against free, prior, and informed consent. So that was the official stance of the executive.
No minimum human rights standards.
Yeah. We don't want the minimum. But in the end, 28% of the shareholders actually voted in favor, which was pretty significant for a newly introduced resolution. And given that it's the biggest fossil fuel funding bank in the world, like 28%'s no small chunk. And
we'll see what it is next year.
But I just got to iterate again how weird it was asking that question, staring at just a wall of blank TV screens with RBC logos on them. And meanwhile, they had 3 cameras pointing right at the microphone. So they were all watching me while I was talking, but I couldn't see them. And yeah, very surreal experience. And, I think, is there anything else to say about RBC? Because, I think we're getting on past the 3-hour mark here.
Yeah.
As soon as I could get rid of my credit card debt, I'm leaving RBC the bank, and I advocate because they're very.
Shout out to anyone who wants to pay off Colin's credit card debt for him. Can get out of that abusive relationship with RBC.
No. That's
leave your bank, RBC, leave it behind.
Well, Dave McKay, actually, I'll just talk quickly about what Dave said afterwards, because they quickly reached a point, because there was enough people talking about Coastal GasLink that he just said, no, we're not talking about this anymore. It's already it's clear to us, this project has been approved by the government, it's been approved by the band councils, there's no issues here. And
23 band councils.
Yeah. And he said, I was just talking to this tiny little island nation, way out in the Pacific, and they're building an LNG import terminal. So what are you going to say to them if you deprive them of their energy independence? And, he just went on to basically parrot every single point of Coastal GasLink and the province, who, all seem to kind of follow this exact, dance. It's like watching bees describe to each other where to go, and then they all repeat it. But yeah, he there wasn't an opportunity to respond to that. But I just desperately wanted to say, when you look at Coastal GasLink, consent was never on the table. It was never a part of it. There's no legally binding measure to ensure that you needed consent to build that project. And just like every project before it, I'm talking too also, as someone who is a band counselor, I subscribe to my house group. I go by my governance, I go by my name, Hoki'i, but I also serve in a band council here in the village. And, to me, the distinction is very clear. And I know how these negotiations work, especially back then too. with many of my family members being involved, where pretty much you're told this project's going to happen whether you like it or not. And, you know, you might as well get something out of it, or you just suffer a whole lot and get nothing.
So here's your benefit agreements.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are
that's pretty much all you can do is negotiate a benefit agreement, and from something like you say, it's already being forced without consent, right? So it's
so we got to question that whole government approval narrative, because, you know, they'll say all sorts of hogwash. When you look down at their environmental assessment certificate, no requirements for consent. And then also another big deal too is, you know, I think a lot of people really try to divide our people on this narrative of, you know, hereditary chiefs and like the democratic paragons that are band councils. I could talk a lot about the undemocratic nature of some band councils, and it blows my mind that, you know, one day a Canadian person could be like, oh, you know, don't give our money to those native chiefs because they're all corrupt and they just steal their money, and then the next day be like, oh no, this is the true voice of the people. It represents, like, it's this total juxtaposition. But, you know, when it comes to the democratic nature of it, you know, where were the referendums? You know, I noticed when the hereditary chiefs were engaging in talks, tripartite negotiations with the province and the feds regarding their MOU, which was a recognition of the Wet'suwet'en title of the hereditary chiefs. You know, band councils were getting up in arms saying, no, we got to be a part of this, and, you know, everyone should have a vote on whether or not Canada recognizes the hereditary title of the Wet'suwet'en peoples. But then, you know, my question right then was, okay, like, why didn't they have a vote for Coastal GasLink, a referendum? And I looked up all those band councils, and there was just one that did a vote, and that was Nikasley. And 70% of the people, of their community members, voted against Coastal GasLink.
Oh, okay.
And then the band council went and signed anyway. And so, like, you know, if anyone has more evidence of the democratic processes, please send it to me, because this is something, you know, I'm trying to wrap my head around as a counselor and as, you know, a member of a hereditary house, because I think these narratives just get so skewed, and they use our people like pawns in order to justify these big narratives, which ultimately end with us getting shafted, because, you know, this pipeline's like almost 90% done, they say. And once that construction's done, there goes all the jobs. And so then, you know, are our people going to be set for life, or are we going to have big swaths of destroyed territory and damaged salmon habitat that, you know, is going to be spent in a generation on Dodge 1500s?
And then left with people who can't pay for their vehicle anymore. Their quads.
Yeah.
Whatever else they bought. That's another thing too that we should look into, is something where, like, they promise jobs. It's like, are people getting the good jobs? Are they getting a good rate of pay? Or are they the first ones being laid off? Yeah, I've seen the parking lot of some of these pipeline camps, and it's like, it's all out of province license plates in there. So, you know, yeah, jobs for who though? That's the question, right? Like, and like you say, for how long, and at what cost after it's coming through, right? So it's all legitimate questions.
I think so, because, you know, in my mind, the next natural progression is, you know, we're going to be geared towards a certain type of industry as a community, and then we're going to just need more of that industry to keep our livelihoods going. And you know, when fossil fuels is done, because there's only a finite supply, and we're dead set on shipping it across the ocean in the most quantities possible, the maximum amount of pipes before, you know, like these, you know, while still trying to supposedly meet reduction standards, you know, after that, you know, what comes next?
Critical minerals.
Critical minerals, yeah.
Gotta fund the, yeah.
Because, you know, we still live in a society where everyone needs to go through 20 new vehicles in their lifetime, and everything's, you know, becomes obsolete after how long? And so, I mean, the mining, I think, just talking about Giksand territory, they want to mine our biggest, most iconic mountain, Stikiotin. You know, there's a company that just recently got all the mineral claims there that goes onto my territory, where they found critical minerals like antimony, and you know, everything that they're going to need for their circuit boards, for their batteries, for you know, like, I just have a feeling they're going to push fossil fuels as far as it can go, as long as it's profitable, and until they reach an absolute breaking point where society just says no. And then afterwards, they're going to do a sharp transition into, okay, now we got to mine as much as possible in order to, you know, actually make our economy green. And so then, you know, now they got to produce like 1 million electric vehicles all of a sudden. They have to produce 1 million solar panels and 1 million this and that. When I just, so I'm just kind of seeing it, like trying to think of it from the business profit perspective, where, okay, what are the natural transition points where we can continuously invest in the most lucrative industries and make as much money off of them as long as possible.
Well, and I think the one of the most important things to mention in this discussion, right, is like, it's like I see it as a form of like underdevelopment, like where like when, even if you follow not even Canadian law, like their own law, what Delgamuukw said is like, you own all the minerals, like it's like crown minerals, crown timber, that doesn't exist, not even in Canadian law, like obviously not in your laws, right, like it's yours, you own it. But even in their own law, constitutionally, you own all of that. So the thought that like, and like the exclusive right to benefit from it, so like that, you know, the magnitude of benefits which you might get from like one project is really quite minuscule from like the wealth in your territories and all of the like probably, you know, very good things you could do with like, okay, reciprocal access to this resource in our territory in a sustainable way. You know, what could that do for your communities as well as for the land? Like, it's just a totally different economic picture if they're actually respecting even just their own law on that. So like, it's just so important to remember that, like, you guys literally own all of this stuff that they're giving away to other people,
and just undermining the rights where it's like to fishing and hunting.
Yeah,
you know, that's your rights, fishing and hunting rights. It's like, no, there's more than that.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, we just got to focus on that big picture. You know, what this struggle is really about. It's not just about a pipeline. I think it's about community, it's about our livelihoods. You know, what it means for us to just, you know, continue to exist as human beings going forward. Like, because, yeah, no, I anticipate this cycle repeating itself until, you know, we get enough people in there. Like, enough people just make enough of a ruckus to, you know, enough people just sharing the information and just seeing through a lot of this spin and a lot of this manipulation to actually start moving in the best interests of the people. I'm not even sure, like, what are the best ways to word that? Because, you know, we're here to stay. And, like, we're not going to flip-flop around on any of our positions because that's baked into us through our culture and through our houses. And, you know, we just got to stand by that and, you know, constantly try to do what, like, we feel is right, like, you know, given this adversity. So, yeah, just shout out to everyone who's watching. Like, a lot of love. Thank you for sticking around. And, you know, it's our first time ever doing something like this. You know, maybe we'll do it again. We'll see.
I'm down.
I might need to upgrade some of this equipment. And, you know, shout out to Kai for managing the camera and getting the action shots of the cat stealing my pizza. Twice.
I think next time we need a lazy Susan in the middle of the table for the microphone and the food.
Yep.
Let me just rotate it.
There you go. And an extra spot you can come in and out.
Yeah. And, you know, big love to, you know, my sister Dalia. I saw you in the chat there. You know, honestly, to everybody. Like,
Yeah, she was at my birthday yesterday.
Hey.
Yeah. She didn't want to play Uno with us, so dollar buy-in. Maybe next time.
Yeah.
And if we're gonna gripe about, if we're gonna call down RBC, I went there because my friend worked there to get change for Uno, and they gave me all the dirty loonies. So that's my gripe with RBC.
RBC.
So they got the dirty money.
Dirty money.
I was like, what is this? It was like a black loony. Yeah, it was disgusting. $40 in change, dirty.
Symbolic.
Oh my God. They have a
it's
drawer.
trickling down from the change, and it goes all the way up, right? So.
Yeah. Oh man.
Get all your change out of RBC.
Let's see. Who else is in this chat here?
But no disrespect to my friend that works there. Just the company as a whole.
Yeah, it's the dirty money policy.
Yeah, I was gonna say anybody can write to the CBC ombudsman about Rob Brown. Again, you never know what ever comes out of those things, but at least you can maybe make them think about, be a bit of a self-reflective of, should I report police line by line verbatim?
Yeah,
Stories
not be so biased.
Yeah.
Not be so one-sided.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you're supposed to be neutral in a situation like that, but I don't know. I don't know anything about reporting.
Yeah, I see all the conservatives are calling for him. Defund the CBC, You think they'd see him that they're, hey guys, they're helping you out.
Maybe they're kind of quiet now. Like, you know what? It's not so bad now. Sort of defund it. It's not the Alberta branch.
Yeah,
they're pretty
it's
cool.
not Rob Brown. Fund Rob Brown.
He might have a place in Rebel News. Maybe they're trying to recruit him or something.
Yeah, true. Maybe he'll get on the board of tech or something.
He's got ulterior motives, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess shout out to Namox. I've seen you in there, and everyone who's stuck around. David, Huesam, Zero Waste.
Can we shout out the haters? Is there any haters in there?
Flint Chandler.
Do you have any haters in the comments?
Jay.
Any fake accounts just spewing anything?
Any fake accounts? Gold Commander.
Is there
shout out to John Brewer.
Is there one that's obviously like CSIS or the RCMP tuning in?
Yeah.
If you're in the chat, just
Dorian,
wave.
Sapiens, Jacob, Noah, Sheldon.
That'd be funny if there was just like John Brewer. I'm not watching. I'm totally not.
Shout out to Amrit.
Are these the homies or the haters?
Oh no, these are all the homies.
Oh, okay.
We don't have any haters.
We don't have any haters?
No,
you gotta shut them out too.
Yeah. No,
to be in here to watch it for so long and just hate, that takes a lot of energy. So shout out to the people that don't like what they're seeing right now.
Yeah,
we appreciate you.
So, I wouldn't call myself the smartest man, and I would say my opinion is pretty biased, but I just laid it out there, to my understanding and in line with my values, my ethics, and it's not always easy. Like we try our best, like every single day. The days when I'm doing nothing, it gets frustrating. Like, what can I do? Like, I gotta do something. And, I'm hoping this turns into something bigger. It's kind of fun. It's fun to hang out with friends, invite more people. And, yeah, like, if anyone wants to just send any emails, messages, criticism, like what we could do better, like I'm all for that, because the goal here is to win the battle. We got one enemy, and that's the crown. And other than that, like we're all human beings. We all have rights here. Giksan law, Wet'suwet'en law, that's all about the rights of living beings. And so I try to do this by walking softly. I do the best I can. Like, that's one of the ancient proverbs of the Giksan. But it's pretty heavy topics, and I just appreciate everyone for coming out. you know, maybe going forward, I was gonna, you know, I'll try to lighten things up too. You know, I was actually gonna start off this whole live stream by getting everyone sitting on the couch. I was gonna be like, welcome to Wilson. Today we're gonna find out which one of these men is the father of this child. So we'll mess around. We're trying to have fun too, because things get pretty, you know. No, love you guys.
To be continued.
To be continued. That's it.
I am not the father.
Quickly. I think if anyone's in that generous mood, support Vanya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And thank you for everybody that did support already. That's much appreciated for believing in me. What I got going on too is I'm gonna do a drop shipping site for now, just to get some stuff out. So I'm working on that. I'm working on Shopify and Printify to get it up and running. So thank you for everybody that believed in me, that gave some cash.
Where can we find that?
Inka Denis Apparel on Instagram. So YINKAD_DENE _APPERAL on Instagram and Facebook. So yeah,
Take all your money from RBC and
I got something good going on. We got a design coming out. Just got to figure out. I think you got to send me some better files. From
some higher resolution.
Yeah, some higher resolution files for that. So we got something in the works. I got something in the works with other artists too. So we're just trying to incorporate pride in who we are. We got I got a bear crest coming out. So what if you associate with Get 'em Dan or your bear as a family crest? It's just something to restore pride in who we are as people. And I eventually want to do one for each clan in our nation. So, and then just keep working with artists from different nations. So it's just restoring pride in who we are. And you know, you get inspiration from other people like Casey Hall from the History Makers and his cousin Charlie Brown. Like, they're holding it down. They got some good stuff. So
I'm wearing one of their shirts. Actually.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey,
there you go.
Yeah.
They're dope. So just inspiration from others, and it's gonna be coming out. Just keep an eye out for that. So
any shout outs you want to make?
All right.
How about you? What do you got?
Yeah.
I got nothing.
It's like we color coordinated today. Look at this. We got the orange and the orange.
Yeah. No, I got nothing to shout out. I just got lots of love and respect. Yeah.
Right on. Okay. So Gatnism, everyone. Thanks for logging on. And
maybe if we put that Pepsi can over here, maybe Pepsi will get on board. We could be like Snoop Dogg GGN. Look at this Gatorade. I'm staying hydrated. We ain't athletes, as you can see. I'm eating pretty good, but I'm staying hydrated.
All right. Good night.